The Witch's Mark, Europe's most feared birthmark. The room was cold, not from the weather, but from the eyes that watched her. A woman stood at the center of a stone chamber, stripped to her undergarments. A cluster of men in dark robes huddled in the shadows, each bearing a flickering torch. One of them stepped forward, holding a rusted needle in one hand and a Bible in the other. He didn't need to speak. The others knew what he was about to do. It was time to search for the mark of the devil. They made her raise her arms, turn around, kneel. Her skin was pale and dappled from the cold, goosebumps betraying her terror. The men were searching for something almost no one ever noticed. A mole, a scar, a skin tag. Any blemish that didn't bleed when pricked, any spot that caused no pain. If they found it, she would die, because that tiny mark, according to the law of the time, meant she had suckled Satan. This was not a scene from a horror movie. It was a real practice sanctioned by church and state in early modern Europe. And for hundreds of years, women, and sometimes men, were accused, tortured, and executed not for what they did, but for what their skin revealed. The Witch's Mark, a superstition so absurd and yet so powerful, claimed tens of thousands of lives. But where did this belief begin? Why did so many believe in it so completely? And how could a freckle, something so common, become a sentence of death? To understand this, we must go back to a Europe writhing in chaos. The late 1400s marked a turning point in religious and social history. The medieval world was fraying at the edges. The Black Death had wiped out nearly half of Europe's population just a century before. Famine still stalked the countryside. Wars between noble houses erupted constantly. Plagues returned every few years. Faith, which once united people under a single worldview, was now being questioned by early whispers of scientific thought and heretical ideas. In times of uncertainty, people seek control, and in the absence of control, they create enemies. Enter the witch. While accusations of sorcery existed in ancient times, the concept of organized witchcraft, complete with secret covens, pacts with the devil, flying ointments, and shape-shifting familiars, truly took hold during the late medieval and early Renaissance periods. The infamous Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, published in 1487 by German inquisitors Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger, provided a chilling blueprint for identifying, interrogating, and executing witches. Within its pages lay a detailed explanation of the Witch's Mark. The book claimed that once a woman entered into a pact with Satan, he would mark her body to seal the covenant. This mark, also called a devil's teat, was allegedly used to feed the demon, a physical representation of her loyalty to him. It was invisible at times, and at other times it took the shape of a mole, a wart, or even a discolored patch of skin. It didn't matter that millions of people had such marks. What mattered was fear, and fear made even the most mundane flesh terrifying. The witch hunts spread like a fever. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, an estimated 40,000 to 60,000 people were executed across Europe for the crime of witchcraft. In some areas, entire towns were caught in waves of hysteria. Germany, France, Scotland, Switzerland, and parts of Italy became notorious for their witch trials. England, while less frenzied, still contributed its share of burnings and hangings. What's important to understand is that most of these people were not killed because they practiced any real magic. They were accused for being different, for being poor, for being old, for being women, and in some cases, simply for bearing a blemish that looked unnatural to someone trained to see evil in every wrinkle. Witch prickers were real professionals. In Scotland and parts of Germany, men were employed specifically to examine the bodies of accused witches for devil's marks. They carried long needles or blades and stabbed suspicious spots. If the area didn't bleed, or the accused didn't feel pain, it was proof of guilt. To avoid blood, some witch prickers carried retractable needles. In other words, they rigged the tests. Once a mark was found, It often didn't matter what came next. Confessions were extracted through torture, sleep deprivation, and public humiliation. The accused might be dunked into water to test if they floated, because only witches were said to float. Or they might be burned with irons, or worse, hanged, or burned at the stake while townspeople gathered to watch. Children, pregnant women, the elderly. No one was beyond suspicion, and always, somewhere on their bodies, investigators pointed to a mark and declared, "There, that's where the devil touched her." This belief was not only a matter of folklore, it was state doctrine. In 1591, Agnes Sampson, a midwife from Scotland, was accused of causing storms that threatened the life of King James VI. She was interrogated in the presence of the king himself. During the search of her body, it was claimed that a witch's mark was found in a hidden place. Her head was shaved, she was stripped naked, she was tortured with ropes around her skull, and eventually confessed under duress to consorting with Satan. She was garroted and burned in Edinburgh. Agnes is just one name among thousands. But her case reveals how even royalty bought into the delusion. King James VI later wrote Demonology, a treatise supporting the persecution of witches and the belief in the supernatural as a legitimate threat to divine order. It inspired Shakespeare's Macbeth and fueled countless more trials. One may ask, how could entire societies, priests, judges, doctors, believe that a mole was a sign of evil? The answer lies in collective trauma. Europe had suffered plague, or after plague, famine, and religious upheaval. In times of crisis, fear needs a target. Superstition becomes a coping mechanism. It provides structure in a chaotic world. If someone could explain why the cows died, or why a child fell ill, or why crops failed, they could sleep better, even if the explanation meant accusing their neighbor of calling demons with a skin tag on her ankle. And there's another psychological layer, the fear of the feminine. Historians now recognize that the witch hunts were, in many ways, a form of gendered violence. Over 75% of accused witches were women. Many were widows, midwives, or herbalists, women who lived outside male-controlled structures. The witch's mark, often found on breasts, thighs, or genitals, gave authorities a moral excuse to violate and control female bodies, to touch, probe, and punish under the guise of righteousness. It wasn't just about religion, it was about power, but not all cultures interpreted such marks with horror. In parts of West Africa, certain skin marks were seen as divine or prophetic. In ancient China, moles had symbolic meanings depending on their location, some seen as lucky, others ominous. In India, birthmarks were sometimes interpreted as signs from past lives, and in indigenous American beliefs, skin variations could be spiritually significant. Only in the cauldron of post-medieval Christian Europe did a freckle become fatal. The turning point came slowly. The Enlightenment brought rationalism, and the scientific revolution began chipping away at magical thinking. Courts gradually stopped accepting witches' marks as evidence. Public trials decreased, and by the late 1700s, most European countries had abolished laws against witchcraft. But the damage was done. Entire communities had lost generations to fear. Thousands of innocent lives were ended, not with swords or bullets, but with words, needles, and superstition. The mark of a witch may have vanished from legal books, but not from cultural memory. Even today, remnants remain. A woman with a prominent mole might joke that it's her witch mark. A birthmark is called a devil's kiss. Halloween costumes still feature them, and stories passed down from grandmothers about warts, spells, or the evil eye still echo with the same fearful awe. But if there's one thing more frightening than a superstition, it's the collective willingness to believe it. The witch's mark is not just a chapter of history, it's a warning, a reminder of how easily fear can override reason, how quickly logic collapses under the weight of panic, and how dangerous it is when people in power seek scapegoats instead of solutions. The next time you glance at a freckle, or feel the prick of a needle, remember this. There was once a time when your very skin could betray you. And now, as the fire dies down around this story, we pass into another shadow, a colder one, where blood was not the only thing craved, and hunger meant something far worse than famine. Buried with iron, the vampire panic of Eastern Europe. They dug him up on the seventh night. The grave was shallow, rushed. Only a thin layer of earth separated the body from the world of the living. The villagers had returned with torches and tools, their eyes full of dread, not grief. This wasn't a mourning ceremony. It was an exorcism. One man stepped forward and began scraping at the soil until the wood of the coffin emerged. They pried it open. The corpse inside was bloated, its face ruddy, mouth slick with what looked like fresh blood. Gasps rose from the crowd. A woman clutched her child closer. An elder murmured a prayer. Without hesitation, the village blacksmith produced an iron spike. He raised it above his head, and with a sickening crunch, drove it through the dead man's chest. A hiss escaped the body's lips. The villagers recoiled. They believed they had stopped a vampire from rising. This scene wasn't invented for cinema. It happened, again and again, across Eastern Europe, for centuries. From rural Serbia to the forests of Romania, fear of the undead was not just a tale told around the hearth. It was a matter of life, death, and afterlife. And in this terrifying chapter of history, superstition did not merely haunt the living, it stalked the dead. The vampire, as the world now knows it, owes much to Gothic literature, Victorian drama, and Hollywood myth, but the roots of the vampire legend are far older, darker, and more deeply tied to actual human behavior, especially the behavior of the frightened and the grieving. In the Balkan Peninsula during the 17th and 18th centuries, waves of hysteria spread through villages and towns about the dead returning to feast upon the living. These vampires were not seductive aristocrats in silk-lined capes. They were recently deceased peasants, often family members, whose return was blamed for illness, crop failure, livestock deaths, or sudden, unexplained misfortunes. This terror was not abstract. Entire communities believed, truly believed, that a corpse could claw its way from the grave and drink the blood of its neighbors. But how did this belief take such a deep root? It begins with death itself. In pre-modern societies, decomposition was not well understood. The process by which the human body bloats, reddens, leaks fluids, and emits gases was terrifying to witness. In cold climates, the body might appear, perfectly preserved for days, skin taut, lips bloody, nails still growing. A dead man's mouth might open from gas pressure. The body might moan as air escaped from the lungs. For people without a modern understanding of biology, this looked like proof of movement, of life after death. Add to this the emotional weight of a sudden tragedy, say, a child dying days after the funeral of a relative, and the temptation to blame the dead becomes overwhelming. And so, grave robbing became a form of communal defense. The first documented vampire hysteria in the West erupted in 1725 in the village of Kisilova, Serbia. A man named Petar Blagojevich had died suddenly. Within a week, 9 others perished under mysterious circumstances, each claiming, before death, that Petar had visited them at night and sat on their chests, draining their vitality. The villagers, panicked, appealed to Austrian officials occupying the region. A local priest and authorities exhumed the body. The account reported that Petar's corpse was unnaturally preserved, with fresh blood at his mouth and fingernails that appeared to have grown. The villagers demanded action. The priest complied. A sharpened stake was driven through Petar's heart. His body, once pierced, allegedly expelled a groan and gushed blood from the mouth. The townspeople were satisfied. The death stopped. For them, the vampire had been slain. A report was written and sent to Vienna. It was received not with laughter, but with concern. A follow-up case in 1732 involved another Serbian villager named Arnold Paula, accused of vampirism after death. Austrian military surgeons conducted an investigation and confirmed the body showed vampiric signs. The report was printed across Europe, launching the vampire into continental awareness. This was not fringe folklore. This was state-recorded, physician-attested, military-approved terror. Iron was the weapon of choice. Iron stakes, iron bars, iron crosses. Cold metal was believed to repel or destroy unclean spirits. Some graves were even found with sickles placed over the necks of the deceased, designed to decapitate the corpse if it tried to rise. Others had large stones placed in the mouth to block the vampire from feeding. Archaeologists in Bulgaria, Poland, and Romania have uncovered hundreds of such graves, bodies pinned down, decapitated, bound. These weren't symbolic acts. They were meant to hold the dead in place, and many were done long after death. In 2012, a 700-year-old skeleton was unearthed in Sozopol, Bulgaria, with an iron spike through its chest and another through its leg. Locals called it the Sozopol vampire. The man had likely died in the 14th century. Yet even in death, his community feared him enough to impale him, possibly after rumors of hauntings. In Poland, graves from the 17th century revealed skulls removed from bodies and placed between the legs or in the chest cavity. Anti-vampire precautions. Some graves had padlocks around the toes, superstition-shaped burial rituals, and terror-shaped entire cemeteries. But what did these so-called vampires look like in the minds of villagers? They weren't always described as blood-drinking ghouls. Some were said to cause illness simply by walking past a house. Others appeared in dreams, suffocating victims with weight or breath. Some accounts told of vampires returning to sleep with spouses, leading to sickness or madness. A vampire's bite was not always mentioned. In fact, the concept of the iconic fang puncture is largely a literary invention. Yet there was always one shared trait, a violation of the natural order. The dead were supposed to stay dead. The idea of revenants, beings that return from the dead, can be found across cultures. But in the Slavic world, this fear ran deeper. Some believed that dying unbaptized, dying alone, dying by suicide, or dying with unresolved anger could cause one to become a vampire. In some cases, even being born on a certain day or having red hair could mark a person as at risk. It was hereditary terror. The vampire panic reached even the nobility. In 1755, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria, disturbed by the growing number of vampire incidents, sent her court physician, Gerard van Swieten, to investigate. Van Swieten travelled through Moravia and Hungary, witnessing grave exhumations and villages, carrying out rituals. He returned skeptical and recommended that vampire trials and exhumations be banned. Maria Theresa complied. She issued a decree outlawing these superstitious practices, but the people didn't stop. It would take centuries before vampire folklore faded into fiction. Even in 19th century New England, echoes remained. In Rhode Island, the Mercy Brown incident of 1892 mirrored the vampire hysteria of Eastern Europe. Mercy, a 19-year-old girl, died of tuberculosis. When her brother fell ill months later, neighbors insisted that Mercy's corpse was feeding on him from beyond. Her body was exhumed, found to be unusually preserved, and her heart was burned. The ashes were mixed into a tonic and given to the dying brother. He died anyway, but the ritual gave the living a sense of control over what they couldn't explain. Iron stakes, beheadings, exhumations. These were not random acts of madness. They were structured attempts to cope with grief, disease, and the fear of corruption. In a world where plague spread with no known cause, where night brought silence and shadows, and where science had not yet displaced myth, the vampire was not just a monster. It was a metaphor for loss that lingers, for rot that won't stay buried, for the fear that death is not the end, but only the beginning of something worse. And for centuries, these fears shaped how people treated the dead and how they viewed the living. Today, the vampire is a cultural icon. He seduces, he dazzles, he sparkles. But the original vampire was never romantic. He was bloated. He was rotting. He was your cousin, your neighbor, your grandfather, the man you buried last week. He was the thing you prayed wouldn't knock on your window in the dark. The superstition may have changed its face, but the fear behind it remains the same. Even now, when science explains what once terrified us, a part of us still looks over our shoulder in the dark, still holds our breath when the wind shifts strangely, still wonders if the grave we dug was deep enough. And as we leave this blood-soaked legend, we step now into a quieter horror. One without graves, where death is invisible, but seen in numbers, and where even a cough can summon panic. The number 4, why Asia fears it like death itself. The room had no 4th floor, or at least none that the elevator dared to name. In towering high-rises across East Asia, the number jumps from 3 to 5, skipping 4 like a haunted stair. In hospitals, hotels, apartment buildings, and sometimes even airplanes, the 4th row or floor is left unmarked, unspoken, unwritten. For those outside the culture, it feels like an odd architectural quirk. But for those within it, the absence speaks volumes. The number 4 doesn't just mean 4, it means death. In Mandarin, Chinese, Cantonese, Korean, and Japanese, the pronunciation of 4 is nearly identical to the word for death. In Mandarin, si sounds eerily close to si. In Japanese, the character si is pronounced shi, identical to the character si, meaning death. The same holds true in Korean. Say can refer to both 4 and death depending on context. This phonetic coincidence spawned a centuries-long superstition that is still felt in the bones of modern Asia. It shapes cities, influences decisions, haunts minds. But how can a mere sound, an accident of language, become so feared that it alters skylines, bank policies, medical practices, and even the very way people die? To answer that, we must understand the power of sound and symbol in cultures where language is not just communication, but belief itself. In many East Asian societies, language is deeply symbolic. The visual and auditory aspects of words are layered with cultural associations, metaphysical meaning, and ancestral significance. In Chinese tradition especially, homophones, words that sound alike, are more than linguistic quirks. They are carriers of luck or doom. This is most evident during holidays and rituals. On Chinese New Year, families decorate homes with red banners, eat fish, because fish, yu sounds like surplus, and avoid uttering unlucky words like empty, sick, or loss. Words spoken at important times are believed to manifest their meanings, good or bad. Which brings us back to the number 4. To say it aloud in sensitive settings is considered bad luck. To write it on a gift is a curse. To give 4 of anything is a silent funeral rite. In weddings, birthdays, baby showers, 4 is avoided like a virus. In funeral parlors and mortuaries, the superstition becomes doctrine. No room is numbered 4, no form lists 4, and no ceremony begins at 4 o'clock. The fear even has a name, tetraphobia, the irrational fear of the number 4. But what's more striking is that it's not irrational at all. The link between 4 and death in East Asia is more than phonetic. It has become self-reinforcing through centuries of tradition, tragedy, and cultural echo. In Japanese hospitals, room 4 is often skipped entirely, just as room 13 is in the West. In Taiwan, license plates containing the digit 4 are avoided, and real estate values drop when the number appears in an address. Some elevators list floors as 3A instead of 4. In Hong Kong's housing blocks, you might see a sequence like 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then 18, skipping every number from 4 through 14. Even in tech-forward South Korea, the superstition persists. Samsung, LG, and other major companies skip the number in product lines, room numbers, and building layouts. Hospitals list F instead of 4F. Apartment buildings label it 3B. Entire developments are designed around its absence. And when the 4th of April, 4/4, rolls around on the calendar, many people avoid major surgeries, business deals, or risky travel. To outsiders, this may seem excessive, but these are not relics of a forgotten past. They are daily realities for millions. And like all deep superstitions, they are rooted in trauma, history, and a cultural relationship with death that is vastly different from that of the West. In Western culture, death is often concealed, hidden behind euphemisms, buried in quiet cemeteries, kept away from the table. But in East Asian traditions, death is a constant presence, to be respected, appeased, and feared. Ancestor worship forms the backbone of many Asian spiritual practices. The dead are not gone. They are watching. They bless. They warn. They punish. And any misstep, linguistic, behavioral, or symbolic, can disturb the balance between worlds. The number 4, sounding like death, becomes an unwelcome invocation. In Feng Shui, the Chinese system of harmonizing energy in spaces, the number 4 disrupts flow. It drags negative qi, into a home or office. Bedrooms on the 4th floor are said to cause illness or unrest. Businesses, with 4 in their name, often struggle with public trust. Hospitals with a 4 on the door see fewer patients. This goes beyond personal belief. It impacts entire economies. In Hong Kong and Singapore, property values can plummet by 10 to 30% if the unit number includes a 4. In one infamous case, an apartment complex in Guangzhou listed multiple 4 series floors, and sales collapsed. Developers had to relabel all floors to remove the offending digit before buyers returned. But the power of 4's fear isn't just economic, it is deeply psychological. Numbers are abstract until we give them meaning. But once that meaning becomes emotional, it embeds itself. 4 doesn't just symbolize death, it evokes it. For someone raised in this cultural framework, walking into room 4 in a hospital while a loved one is dying is not just unpleasant, it's unbearable. Some scholars believe the phonetic root of this superstition reflects a deeper anxiety, the inevitability of death in a world shaped by collective memory. Consider Japan's long history of natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons, and the reverence given to spirits of the dead. Or China's dynastic collapses, famines, and purges, where millions died unnamed. Death was never far. 4 simply became the sound that reminded people of what they already knew, that life is fragile, and the dead are always listening. One of the most haunting examples of the number's psychological weight comes from the 1995 Sarang Hospital fire in South Korea. On June 18, 1995, a fire broke out in a medical facility that housed elderly and bedridden patients. The blaze spread rapidly through the 4th floor, where emergency exits were limited and evacuation plans unclear. 17 people died, all in rooms clustered around the floor marked 4. Media coverage fixated on the symbolism. Survivors whispered that it was a cursed level, that the number had summoned misfortune. The event only deepened public anxiety about being placed on a 4th floor, especially in places of sickness. Even among modern, secular generations, tetraphobia survives, because when tragedy confirms a belief, it becomes doctrine. Not all Asian cultures treat 4 with equal dread. In some parts of Vietnam and Thailand, the superstition is less pronounced. In Malaysia, attitudes vary by ethnic group. Yet in Japan, China, and South Korea, avoidance of the number is nearly systemic. Ironically, some businesses have begun embracing it, especially in rebellious counterculture branding. Clothing lines use the number 4 in logos to signal edge. Some rock bands name albums after it, mocking the fear. But these are rare exceptions, and they often provoke backlash. More common are efforts to quietly circumvent the number without drawing attention to it. A developer doesn't advertise that 4 is missing from a building. They simply label the 4th floor as 5, and no one questions it. Elevators hum along with the change. Forms skip lines. Insurance companies remove the 4th item from clauses. The absence becomes its own kind of presence. It is not unlike the Western fear of Friday the 13th, or Room 666, or walking under ladders, but it is far more deeply woven into daily life, urban planning, and ritual behavior. Still, the question lingers. What power do we give to coincidence? Had the word for 4 been slightly different in pronunciation, this superstition might never have formed. But it did, and in doing so, it reveals a profound truth about human nature. We don't fear numbers, we fear what they remind us of. The number 4 is feared not because it is evil, but because it echoes the finality we all try to ignore. In a culture where the dead are never truly gone, and where words carry the weight of worlds, 4 is a whisper, a warning, a word not spoken. And so, buildings continue to rise, with a missing floor between 3 and 5. And people continue to knock on wood, or burn incense, or mutter charms, not to change the future, but to feel safer in a world ruled by uncertainty. The number 4 doesn't kill, but belief. Belief can move mountains, shape cities, and silence a syllable. We now leave the spectral hum of superstition heard in an elevator's silence, and descend into something older. A curse sealed in stone, an empire's wrath bound by rope and fire, and a tomb that claimed the lives of those who dared to open it. Cursed Pharaohs, the tomb that killed a century of men. The air inside the chamber hadn't been breathed in over 3,000 years. It was heavy, dry, and sickly sweet with the scent of ancient resins. Dust hung motionless in the beams of torchlight as the explorers descended the narrow shaft. The deeper they went, the quieter it became, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Then, they found it. A sealed stone doorway, undisturbed, a name etched into the limestone. Tutankhamun. They broke the seal. Within days, the world rejoiced at the discovery, but the rejoicing would not last. Because soon, the men who entered that tomb began to die. Strange illnesses, sudden accidents, unexplained fevers. The newspapers called it the curse of the pharaoh, and the legend spread like wildfire. But was it real? Or was it the most powerful superstition archaeology had ever uncovered? The story begins in 1922 in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, Egypt. British archaeologist Howard Carter, after years of fruitless searching, had finally located the buried tomb of the little-known 18th dynasty pharaoh Tutankhamun. With financial backing from British aristocrat Lord George Carnarvon, Carter unearthed a staircase leading down into the sands, an untouched tomb, sealed and intact. The find was unprecedented. While many royal tombs had been looted centuries earlier, this one remained nearly pristine. Inside were thousands of treasures, golden statues, ivory ornaments, ceremonial chariots, and the now iconic golden death mask of the young king. Carter had found the most complete pharaonic burial site ever discovered. But even before the golden mask was revealed to the public, stories of death began to circulate, and the tomb's curse took shape. Just 4 months after entering the tomb, Lord Carnarvon died suddenly in Cairo. He had suffered a mosquito bite on his cheek, which became infected after he nicked it shaving. The infection developed into blood poisoning, followed by pneumonia. He died on April 5, 1923, at the age of 56. Newspapers seized on the story. The New York Times ran headlines about the curse of the mummy. The London Times printed rumours of a warning inscribed on the tomb, though no such text was ever found by Carter. Even more chilling, at the moment of Carnarvon's death, the lights reportedly went out across Cairo. His beloved dog, back home, in England, let out a howl and dropped dead. It was the perfect storm of superstition, coincidence, and press hysteria. And it was just the beginning. Within the next decade, several individuals connected to the excavation died under mysterious or sudden circumstances. George J. Gould, a wealthy American financier who visited the tomb in 1923, developed a fever the same evening and died in France shortly afterward of pneumonia. Prince Ali Kamel Fahmy Bey of Egypt, who attended the opening, was shot dead by his wife in a London hotel. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who x-rayed Tutankhamun's mummy before it was unwrapped, died shortly after the examination. Arthur Mace, a member of Carter's excavation team, died of arsenic poisoning in 1928. Hugh Evelyn White, another archaeologist who helped catalogue the tomb's treasures, reportedly hung himself in his apartment, leaving behind a note written in red ink. "I have succumbed to a curse." Even Howard Carter, who lived longer than most, died in 1939 under mysterious health conditions. Some claimed he had long been suffering from a strange skin illness that no physician could explain. By 1930, over 24 individuals linked to the tomb had died, many of them suddenly or inexplicably. The media made a meal of it, and the public was hooked. The curse of the pharaoh had become legend. But what was the origin of this superstition? Curses placed on tombs were not unique to Tutankhamun. In fact, ancient Egyptian tombs, especially those of the Old and Middle Kingdoms, frequently bore warnings and maledictions meant to ward off thieves and desecrators. A tomb inscription from the 6th dynasty reads, "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb, impure, there will be judgment, an end shall be made for him. I shall seize his neck like a bird." Another from Saqqara warns, "Anyone who disturbs this tomb will be devoured by the crocodile, the hippopotamus, and the lion." These were not idle threats. The ancient Egyptians believed strongly in Ma'at, the balance of the universe, and that violating sacred space disrupted not just the tomb, but the cosmos. Curses were divine insurance policies. Yet in Tutankhamun's tomb, no explicit curse was found. No carved warning. No invocations of wrath. Just standard prayers for the pharaoh's journey into the afterlife. So where did the modern curse originate? Some scholars believe the legend of the curse was planted by the press, especially by sensationalist writers like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, creator of Sherlock Holmes, who was deeply interested in spiritualism and publicly claimed that Carnarvon's death was due to elementals guarding the tomb. Others point to the public's growing fascination with the occult in the early 20th century. Spiritualism, seances, and ghost photography were all the rage. The idea that ancient Egypt was full of dark secrets and hidden powers fit perfectly into the era's obsessions. And yet, there are strange facts. Carnarvon's cause of death, blood, poisoning from a shaving wound, is extremely rare. The blackout across Cairo at the hour of his death, well documented, though possibly a coincidence. The number of people who died shortly after involvement with the tomb, undeniable. Of the 58 people present at the opening, at least 8 died within a decade, many from unnatural causes. That's a significant ratio. And still, the man who spent the most time in the tomb, Howard Carter, survived for another 16 years. If there was a curse, it was selective. Modern science offers another explanation. Some researchers suggest that airborne toxins may have been present in the sealed chambers. Molds like Aspergillus flavus, Stachybotrys chartarum, and other fungi, thriving in the damp organic materials inside the tomb, could cause respiratory infections, organ damage, or hallucinations. If a person already had a weakened immune system, as Carnarvon did, the exposure could be fatal. There's also the possibility of radioactive materials, trace elements like radon gas, concentrated in closed subterranean spaces for millennia. However, none of these theories have been definitively proven. The truth is, the curse may lie not in the tomb, but in the mind. Fear, especially in those predisposed to believe, can manifest real symptoms: anxiety, stress-induced illness, even psychosomatic death. The nocebo effect, the opposite of the placebo effect, shows us that belief in harm can cause harm. In this sense, the curse becomes not a magical punishment, but a psychological contagion. Death by suggestion. Regardless of its origin, the superstition has become immortal. Even today, the term "curse of the Pharaoh" evokes images of dusty tombs, flickering torches, and golden coffins. Hollywood has built entire franchises on it. From The Mummy to Indiana Jones, the trope of the vengeful ancient spirit continues to haunt popular culture. But beneath the myth lies a chilling truth. Tombs are more than graves. They are memory vaults, and when the living desecrate the space of the dead, even in the name of history, they enter a space where belief, emotion, and biology collide. Whether or not the curse is real, the consequences can be. And for those who witnessed the strange deaths that followed Tutankhamun's unveiling, no amount of rationalism could explain away what they saw. They entered a sealed world, and something followed them back. As the sands settle once more over the Valley of the Kings, we travel from stone to soil, from death sealed in gold to death that grows from the earth, where ancient forests hide spirits in plain sight, and the people speak in whispers, because to speak aloud is to invite the wrath of something unseen. The Wendigo. When cannibalism wasn't just a crime, it was a curse. The snow fell without sound. Thick, wet flakes blanketed the trees, muffled footsteps, and swallowed voices. The forest was still, too still. Somewhere in the white silence, a family huddled in their cabin, low on firewood and nearly out of food. The youngest had stopped crying days ago. The eldest no longer spoke. Their father stood near the door, jaw clenched, breath visible with every exhale. He had heard something last night, something that breathed like a man, but moved like a shadow, something that scratched at the edge of reason and whispered a hunger that no meat could satisfy, a hunger that once answered could never be undone. They said it came with the cold. They called it the Wendigo, long before Europeans crossed into North America. The Algonquian-speaking peoples of the northeastern forests had already mapped the edges of madness. They knew what hunger could do. They knew the lines that separated man from monster, and how thin those lines became in the dead of winter. The Wendigo, in their stories, was not merely a creature. It was a force, a spiritual corruption that consumed anyone who gave in to the unspeakable act of cannibalism. It was a spirit born not of the earth, but of desperation, greed, and endless hunger. If you ate human flesh in the dead of winter, even to survive, you were cursed, you were already lost. Descriptions of the Wendigo vary across regions and time, but certain elements remain constant. It is gaunt, skeletal, stretched, with flesh pulled tight like paper over bone. Its eyes are sunken, glowing, faintly. Its breath chills the air. Its voice is wind. Its craving is insatiable, and its heart, if it has one, is encased in ice. In some tales, the Wendigo is a monstrous being, towering and grotesque. In others, it is a possessing spirit, invisible and malignant, that infects a person's soul after an act of cannibalism or unchecked greed. The person may look normal at first, thin, tired, hollow-eyed, but over time they change. They begin to crave more, speak less, retreat from fire, eyes dart, flesh shrivels, and then they vanish into the woods. By the time anyone realizes what they've become, it's too late. The most disturbing part of the Wendigo myth is that it isn't purely myth. It's deeply rooted in real history, real survival stories, and documented events. Among the Cree, Ojibwe, Innu, Saulteaux, and other First Nations, the Wendigo represented not just spiritual punishment, but a warning, a boundary, a cultural firebreak against the unthinkable. In the brutal northern winters, When hunting failed and snow trapped families for weeks, starvation was a constant threat. The temptation to survive at all costs hovered at the edges of consciousness. The Wendigo legend was not merely folklore, it was social control, designed to prevent moral collapse in desperate times. To eat human flesh was to invite the Wendigo into your body. Once invited, it would never leave. This belief was not metaphorical. It led to trials, executions, and diagnoses. In the 17th through 19th centuries, multiple documented cases describe individuals accused of Wendigo possession. One of the most infamous was Swift Runner, a Creeman and former Hudson's Bay Company guide. In the winter of 1878-79, Swift Runner emerged from the wilderness alone. He claimed his entire family, wife, children, brother, had died of starvation. But he did not look starved. He looked strong, healthy, well-fed. Suspicious, authorities investigated his campsite. What they found horrified them. Human bones, broken, femurs, skull fragments, cooking pots with fat residue, evidence that he had murdered and eaten his entire family, even while supplies were nearby. He confessed, said a Wendigo had infected his dreams, that he could not stop himself. He was hanged in Fort Saskatchewan in 1879. Witnesses claimed he faced death calmly. Others whispered that the spirit had already left him, that it had found another host. Anthropologists and psychologists eventually coined a term for the condition, Wendigo psychosis. A cultural-bound syndrome, it is described as a rare, intense craving for human flesh, even when other food is available, accompanied by fear of becoming a cannibal, or belief that one already is. Wendigo psychosis remains controversial. Some argue it's a product of cultural suggestion, much like mass hysteria. Others view it as a real psychological response to trauma and famine, filtered through belief systems unique to indigenous cultures. In either case, it is clear that the legend shaped behavior. It gave name to the nameless horrors of starvation, madness, and moral collapse. The Wendigo also held environmental symbolism. Among the Anishinaabe, the spirit was tied to ecological imbalance, greed, overhunting, destruction of nature. In this reading, the Wendigo punishes not just cannibalism, but insatiable consumption. It is the spirit of endless taking, a warning that those who devour without limit will become what they fear. This interpretation has found eerie modern relevance. Writers and scholars have repurposed the Wendigo in ecological critique, equating it with capitalism, colonialism, and industrial greed. The devourer, the hunger that expands with every bite, a once cultural ghost now stalking the globe in metaphor. But make no mistake, the Wendigo is not just allegory, it is fear with antlers. In the deep forests of Canada and the Great Lakes region, people still claim to see it, hear it, smell its breath on the wind. Some stories describe an eerie call, half scream, half whistle, that echoes between the trees. Others tell of large footprints appearing in snow too deep for any animal to traverse, and some warn not to speak the name too often, because the Wendigo listens. In modern media, the Wendigo has taken on new forms. In horror films, it appears as a grotesque monster. In thrillers, as a psychological affliction. In Marvel Comics, it's a cursed creature of the Canadian wilderness. In video games like Until Dawn, it's a fast, brutal predator. But in most cases, its original cultural meaning is erased or diluted. This has drawn criticism from Indigenous scholars and storytellers, who remind the public that the Wendigo is not just a cryptid, it is a sacred story, a reflection of trauma and survival. To treat it as just another horror trope is to miss its depth and dishonor its origin. Still, its presence persists, because the fear it represents of becoming what you swore never to be is eternal. There is a moment in every long winter when food runs low and the cold creeps into the bones where the Wendigo stirs, not outside, but inside. The man who once loved his children now cannot meet their eyes. The mother who once prayed now gnaws at dreams filled with blood. The spirit does not enter as a scream. It enters as a whisper. It offers a choice. And once taken, that choice cannot be undone. The Wendigo is not the act of cannibalism. It is the hunger that never ends. From these frozen woods, we turn now toward a different kind of death, not of the flesh, but of the soul. A soundless cry in the fog, a song that no one dares to follow, and the spirit that comes to claim what is hers, always just before the final breath. The Banshee's cry, when Irish families waited for death. It begins as a whisper carried on the wind, a low wail threading through the hills, almost too soft to notice. Then it rises, soft and mournful, growing sharper, stranger, until it splits the air like a blade across stone. Dogs whimper, crows take flight, and every head in the cottage turns toward the window. No one speaks. They already know what it means. Someone in the house is going to die. In the windswept fields of ancient Ireland, there exists no spirit more feared and more respected than the Banshee. She is not evil. She does not kill. But her arrival is the echo of death itself. When her cry is heard, it is a prophecy, one that never lies. Her name comes from the Irish bean cedar, woman of the fairy mound, a nod to Ireland's mythic past, where the veil between this world and the other world was gossamer thin. Unlike typical folklore figures of malice or mischief, the Banshee is a harbinger, a watcher, a mourner, and she is always heard, never seen, unless you are among the few who wish they hadn't. Legends of the Banshee date back over 1,000 years, to pre-Christian Ireland, when belief in fairy folk, spirits, and ancestral ties ran deep in the Celtic imagination. In early accounts, the Banshee appears as a solitary woman, dressed in a flowing grey or white cloak, often with long red or silver hair. Sometimes she combs her hair by the light of the moon. Other times, she stands by a stream, her face veiled, weeping. But the most consistent feature is her keening, a vocal lament so powerful, so mournful, that it curdles the blood and halts the breath. To hear her is to know someone is about to cross over. The act of keening, or cowiniad, was once an integral part of Irish funeral rites. Traditionally performed by women, these laments were sung aloud at wakes and burials, giving voice to grief and guiding the dead to the afterlife. The Banshee's cry may have originated from this practice. Over time, the professional keener evolved, in folklore, into a supernatural mourner, a spirit who sang not at the wake, but before it. The Banshee didn't just foretell death, she prepared it. Her cry was the sound of fate approaching, and, as the tales say, there was no stopping her. Many believed that the Banshee only followed ancient Irish families, especially those whose surnames began with O or Mac. Names like O'Brien, O'Neill, McCarthy, and MacDomnail were said to be watched over by their own personal Banshee. In this interpretation, she was not a villain, but an ancestral spirit, a guardian mourner, tasked with warning the family when one of their own was nearing the end. Some stories even claimed that multiple banshees would appear when someone of great importance or nobility was about to die. Their cries would harmonize in a sound so haunting that it was said to stop time. One 18th century account tells of an Irish lord whose carriage was halted by an unseen force in the hills. His horses refused to move. From the mist rose 3 women, wailing in harmony. The next morning, the lord was found dead in his bed. No wounds, no illness, just silence. But for every tale of the noble mourner, there are others darker. Accounts that describe the Banshee as a spectral hag, with rotting skin, blood-red eyes, and sharp black teeth. Her cry in these versions is not a lament, but a shriek, a curse, a sound so piercing it drives those who hear it to madness. In these stories, she is more akin to a death spirit, less a mourner than a hunter. In some parts of Ulster and Connaught, the Banshee was said to appear at crossroads or standing atop ancient burial mounds. Children were warned not to approach any old woman combing her hair alone at dusk. If you saw her, and she saw you, it meant death would visit not just your house, but your soul. The Banshee's comb is an important symbol in many stories. To take it, to touch it, is to invite ruin. One tale tells of a traveller who found a silver comb lying by a stream. Thinking it a valuable trinket, he picked it up and brought it home. That night, he heard wailing outside his window. The next night, it came closer. On the third night, the Banshee stood at his door. She didn't speak. She only screamed, and he died the next morning, still clutching the comb. This object, ordinary yet intimate, may symbolize vanity, ownership, or connection to the spirit world. To touch what belongs to the Banshee is to cross a line, to steal from death, and death always collects. Though rooted in the past, Banshee lore persisted into modernity. As recently as the early 20th century, reports of Banshee encounters were printed in Irish newspapers. In 1901, a woman in County Clare claimed she heard keening outside her cottage, hours before her mother collapsed and died. In 1928, a Dublin nurse swore that an old patient had whispered about the woman crying just before slipping into unconsciousness. Days later, he died with no known illness. Soldiers in World War I wrote letters home describing dreams of wailing women, shortly before news of deaths reached their families. Some Irish troops claimed the Banshee followed them even across the sea, and among the diaspora, Irish immigrants to America, Canada, and Australia, the legend endured. Even in new lands, the old beliefs lingered, because grief travels, and so do ghosts. Like many superstitions, belief in the Banshee operates in two dimensions, fear and comfort. To hear her was terrifying, yes, but it also gave families time to prepare, time to gather, time to say goodbye. In a world where death was often sudden and unexplained, her cry was a grim gift. A moment to brace for the inevitable. Some even left out offerings, a bit of milk, a lock of hair, a token, to appease her, to soften her cry, to delay her visit, if only for a night. She wasn't a monster, she was a ritual. In literature and film, the Banshee is often misrepresented, rendered as a screaming ghost or Gothic ornament. But in her native mythos, she is far more complex, a fusion of ancestor, omen, and sorrow. She embodies the Irish relationship with death, where grief is loud, public, and sacred, where wailing is not hysteria, but devotion, where mourning is not weakness, but power. And in this way, the Banshee endures not as a threat, but as a presence. She reminds us that even death should not come without warning, that even silence has a voice. Now, as her cry fades into the hills behind us, we pass from grief into another darkness, where dolls stare with eyes that move, where forgotten islands are filled not with joy, but with rot, where playthings become prisons, and innocence becomes the bait for something much older. Japan's cursed dolls, Okiku's hair keeps growing. She sits in a glass case, surrounded by silence. The room is dim, the air dry with incense and wood polish. Tourists come and go, bowing respectfully, whispering to each other without truly understanding. Some say she blinks. Others say they've seen her smile. But everyone agrees on one thing. Her hair grows, not just by inches, but strands at a time, curling down past her chin, brushing against the silk of her kimono. Monks trim it regularly, but it always returns. The doll's name is Okiku, and if you ask anyone at the Manenji Temple in Hokkaido, Japan, they'll tell you that she is haunted. Dolls in Japan are not just toys, they are vessels, symbols, in some traditions, protectors, in others, offerings, and in rare cases, they are believed to harbour spirits, particularly those of children who died too young. This belief is not new. It stretches back centuries to the Heian period, 794–1185, when dolls were used in purification, rituals. Called hitogata, they were paper effigies that absorbed bad luck and were cast into rivers to carry misfortune away. Over time, these symbolic figures evolved into the ningyo, the traditional Japanese dolls that took on a more lifelike form. But with lifelikeness came something else, a discomfort, a mystery, a fear that perhaps something else looked out through their eyes. The story of Okiku begins in 1918, in Sapporo. A teenage boy named Eikichi Suzuki purchased a doll for his 2-year-old sister, Okiku, from a shop on the famous Tanuki-koji shopping street. The doll stood about 40 centimeters tall, with a pale porcelain face, black eyes, and shoulder-length hair. She wore a red and gold kimono and quickly became the child's favorite possession. The girl and her doll were inseparable, but the joy was short-lived. Later that year, Okiku fell gravely ill. Some say it was a sudden fever. Others say it was the flu. Within days, she was gone. The family was devastated. In their grief, they placed the doll on a home altar in remembrance. It was meant as a comfort, something to hold the child's memory. But then, something changed. The doll's hair began to grow. At first, they dismissed it. Surely they had imagined it. But soon, the straight black locks that had once rested at her chin now reached her shoulders. Then her waist. They trimmed it, nervously, respectfully. But it always returned. Eventually, they became afraid. In 1938, the family entrusted the doll to the Manenji Temple on the island of Hokkaido, explaining their belief that their daughter's spirit had taken residence. Within it, the temple agreed to keep the doll safe and to continue trimming the hair as a form of devotion. The priests who cared for her claimed they experienced strange occurrences, flickering lights, sudden drops in temperature, dreams of a child crying in the dark. But they never attempted to remove the spirit. In Japanese tradition, it is dangerous to disturb a spirit once it has found a vessel. Instead, they honored her, and the hair kept growing. The phenomenon of Okiku's hair has been examined more than once. In the 1970s, scientists reportedly conducted an analysis on a strand and declared it human, belonging to a young child. However, no official peer-reviewed study was ever published. The temple itself has always discouraged media intrusion, insisting that Okiku is not a spectacle, but a sacred responsibility. Visitors are allowed to view her, but no photography is permitted. Monks perform regular rituals to appease her, and, while some say her expression has changed over time, becoming softer or more knowing, no formal record has ever confirmed it. Still, stories abound. A woman claimed she saw the doll's eyes move slightly as she entered the room. A child swore he heard laughter. One former caretaker left the temple entirely after dreaming, night after night, of drowning in hair. But Okiku is far from the only haunted doll in Japan. The island nation, with its deep reverence for spirits, wakami, and ancestral energy, has long believed that objects, especially those cherished or neglected, can retain emotional residue. The concept is called tsukumogami, the idea that after 100 years, an inanimate object gains a soul. Old umbrellas, teapots, or sandals become animate spirits, often mischievous, occasionally wrathful. In this worldview, a beloved doll, soaked in a child's love and grief, would be especially potent. These beliefs inform Hina Matsuri, the doll festival celebrated every March 3rd, where families display ornamental dolls to pray for their daughter's health. But once the festival ends, the dolls must be put away immediately. It is said that leaving them out too long invites misfortune, or something worse. In Shinto temples across Japan, doll funerals are held. People bring old or broken dolls to be blessed and burned, because to simply discard one in the trash is an insult to the object and to any spirit that might have come to dwell within. Not all haunted dolls are benevolent. In some regions, Stories persist of dolls that curse, possess, or torment those who mock or mistreat them. One tale tells of a merchant who mocked a shrine doll as ugly. Days later, his business collapsed, his family grew ill, and his hair began falling out. He returned to the shrine to apologize, and only then did the misfortune stop. These legends serve both as cautionary tales and as reflections of a broader Japanese philosophy, that everything is connected, that energy flows between people, objects, and spirits, and that even toys can become something more. The West often views haunted dolls as horror gimmicks, Annabelle, Chucky, and their ilk. But in Japan, the haunted doll is not merely frightening. She is sacred, a mirror of loss, emotion, and transience. In Okiku, we see the expression of unresolved grief, a child's sudden death, a family's devotion, a spirit that lingers not to harm, but perhaps to be remembered. She does not speak, she does not move, she only waits, and the hair continues to grow. As with many superstitions, science offers explanations. Some suggest the hair never truly grows, that it was implanted unevenly, or that ambient humidity causes fiber extension. Others speculate that it's an illusion, confirmation bias fueled by suggestion. But the temple monks do not argue. They do not analyze. They simply care for her. Because to them, and to thousands of visitors each year, Okiku is not an object of horror, but of reverence, a soul housed in porcelain, a reminder that death does not always take everything, and sometimes it leaves something behind. Now, as we bow before her case and step away from the silence, we journey toward another myth. One not bound in glass, but in numbers, a whisper of fate, a superstition so powerful it reshapes cities, hospitals, and homes, where a single digit can mean life or death. The evil eye, Mediterranean death glances. The baby stopped crying the moment the woman entered the room. She was a distant cousin, visiting from a neighboring village, dressed in dark colors, with eyes too sharp and a voice too smooth. She smiled at the infant in the cradle and said, "He's so healthy, far too perfect for his age." The room fell silent. The mother's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the blue glass amulet hanging from the cradle's corner. She muttered a prayer, spat 3 times over her shoulder and whispered, "May his luck not attract the eye." Too late. That night, the child spiked a fever. And so began the fear that he had been overlooked, struck not with hands or illness, but with something far more ancient. They called it the evil eye. It is among the oldest and most widespread superstitions in the world, crossing civilizations, religions, and continents. From Greece to Turkey, from Italy to India, from Persia to North Africa, the evil eye exists under many names: Mal de Ojo, Mati, Nazar, Ayin Hara, Al-Ain. But its essence remains unchanged, a curse transmitted through a glance charged with envy, admiration, or unspoken malice. The belief is simple: too much praise, too much beauty, too much fortune, and the eye will notice, and when it does, it takes. The earliest known references to the evil eye appear in ancient Mesopotamian texts dating back over 5,000 years. The Sumerians, Assyrians, and Babylonians all feared the power of the eye. In these early civilizations, the gaze was not passive, it was active. It could create, it could destroy. Later, the Greeks developed the concept into a fully formed belief system. Plutarch, in the 1st century AD, wrote that the human eye had the ability to emit invisible rays, projectiles of negative energy capable of harming others. Greek physicians noted sudden illness, fatigue, or misfortune after someone had received too much attention. In this worldview, to be seen too much was dangerous. The powerful glance, especially from someone jealous, bitter, or childless, could dry up a child's vitality, wither crops, or even cause miscarriage. In villages across the Aegean and Ionian coasts, people still whisper about children who fail to thrive because someone praised them without protection. In this way, the evil eye is not just a superstition, It is a folk diagnosis for misfortune. Themioi, protective measures, are equally ancient. In Greece and Turkey, the Nazar amulet, a blue glass eye with a white and black center, is worn around the neck, hung in homes, embedded into jewelry, painted on cars, even placed on newborns' pillows. The idea is to reflect the gaze back, to confuse or blind the eye before it strikes. In Italy, horns or red coral pendants are worn to ward off the malocchio. In North Africa, hands, especially the hand of Fatima or Kamsa, are used as powerful counter-curses, believed to shield the wearer from malevolent forces. In India, black coal is applied to children's foreheads or cheeks, not for beauty, but to disfigure perfection slightly, making them less vulnerable to the eye. In some cultures, spitting 3 times or making the sign of the horns with fingers can break the curse, and in others, the only cure is ritual unbinding, performed by elders, midwives, or folk healers who burn herbs, chant verses, or wave smoke over the afflicted. What makes the evil eye unique among global superstitions is its dual nature. It is both active and passive. One can give the eye unintentionally. You may admire a neighbor's good fortune too intensely. Compliment a child without saying God bless. Praise a bride without touching her veil. Even good wishes can carry poison if unaccompanied by modesty. It is envy unspoken that gives it power. This ambiguity fuels anxiety, because you may never know who cast it. A relative, a friend, a stranger, yourself, and that is perhaps its most terrifying quality. You can become the vessel without even trying. In Jewish tradition, the evil eye, ayin hara, is feared as a spiritual infection. The Talmud warns against showing excessive wealth or joy, lest others cast the eye in response. Weddings, births, and celebrations often include protective blessings to divert the gaze. In some Hasidic communities, the phrase Kain ayin hara, no evil eye, is muttered after compliments. In homes, amulets or inscriptions invoking God's protection are placed near doors. In Islam, the evil eye, al-ain, is mentioned in hadiths attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. It is considered real and dangerous. Protective verses from the Quran, such as Al-Falaq and An-Nas, are recited to shield the believer. In all cases, the solution is not confrontation, but containment. The eye cannot be destroyed, it must be outwitted. In 1923, a wealthy Greek family in Thessaloniki experienced a wave of misfortune, fires, illness, business collapse. Locals whispered that it began after a foreign dignitary praised their mansion at a party without touching the house's threshold stone, a customary ward. The mother of the house sought help from an old Yorona, or wise woman. The woman performed a ritual with olive oil and water, dropping a bead of oil into a bowl. If the oil dispersed, it meant the evil eye was present. The oil dissolved immediately. She burned laurel leaves and recited incantations. Within days, the family's health improved, fire stopped. Their luck, they said, had returned. Even in modern secular societies, belief in the evil eye remains deeply ingrained. In Turkey, 99% of households display at least one nazar. In India, films and television shows depict nazar dosh, the affliction of the eye, as a serious threat. In Mexico and Central America, folk healers called curanderos treat mal de ojo with egg-cleansing rituals, passing a raw egg over the body and cracking it into water to read the curse. Even in the Western world, where belief has faded, echoes remain. We say, knock on wood, to avoid tempting fate. We hide our success. We deflect praise with modesty. Because deep down, something still believes. If the world sees too much, something will take it away. Psychologically, the evil eye may reflect collective anxiety around visibility. To be seen too clearly is to be judged. To be admired too openly is to invite resentment. In this way, the evil eye protects humility. It encourages people to temper their pride, to hide their blessings, to move quietly. But it also instills fear of exposure, of envy, of being too happy in a world that punishes joy. Some anthropologists argue that the evil eye reflects a survival mechanism, a warning system developed in tightly knit communities where status, jealousy, and luck could determine life or death. In such systems, standing out was dangerous. The eye was society's invisible regulator. Others see it as a social equalizer. The rich, the beautiful, the lucky, they are more at risk. The more you have, the more you can lose. The eye becomes a reminder. No one is untouchable. The eye cannot be seen, but it can be felt. A sudden shiver, a headache with no cause, a baby who won't stop crying, a dog that won't stop barking at the same window, a mirror that cracks without warning. These signs, they say, are its signature. But the cure is always the same: protection through ritual, glass charms, smoke, spit, words, faith, and silence. Because if you talk too much about what you love, if you show it off, if you draw the eye, you may never get it back. Now, as we turn from the invisible glance to the visible shape, we move toward a creature not of envy, but of darkness. Not a spirit born of admiration, but one summoned by blood, where thirst cannot be quenched, and graves are only the beginning. Dogs that howl at death, ancient Roman omens of doom. The barking would not stop. It started just after sundown, low and distant, a sound barely noticed at first. But as the night deepened, it came closer. The dog howled at the courtyard, wall, its snout raised toward the stars, its body trembling as if it sensed something no human eye could see. Inside the house, a candle flickered. An old man stirred in his sleep, then stilled again. By morning, he was dead. The family did not cry. They had heard the howling. They had already begun to prepare. Since the dawn of civilization, dogs have been more than companions. In nearly every culture, they have occupied the thin space between the living and the dead, guardians, messengers, psychopomps. But in ancient Rome, they were also omens. To the Roman mind, a dog howling at night, especially outside the home of the sick or elderly, was not merely unsettling, it was a herald of death. And this was no small superstition. It shaped how Romans interpreted signs, structured rituals, and even planned their funerals. Because when a dog howled, Rome listened. The Romans believed in omens, or omina, as a system of divine communication. Unlike prophecies, which were spoken by oracles or seers, omens were spontaneous signs sent by the gods, nature, or the spirits of the dead. Everything could be an omen: the flight of birds, a sneeze at the wrong moment, a drop of blood on the floor. But few were more feared or more immediate than the howl of a dog. Pliny the Elder, in his Natural History, wrote, "A dog howling, without cause, is a warning of approaching doom." Virgil, in the Aeneid, evokes dogs barking wildly before the descent into the underworld, where Cerberus, the three-headed hound, guards the gates of death. To hear a dog wailing in the middle of the night, especially near a domus, a noble Roman home, was considered a direct message from the underworld. The dog saw what others could not. It saw the lares, the spirits of the household dead. It saw lemures, the angry, wandering dead, and it saw mors, the personification of death itself. Roman households treated such occurrences with deep seriousness. If a dog howled more than once, or refused to eat, or circled the same place repeatedly, cleansing rituals were often performed. One such rite, called the Lemuria, was held each May 9th, 11, and 13. During this ancient festival, Romans would walk barefoot through their homes at midnight, throwing black beans over their shoulders and chanting, "With these I redeem me and mine." It was meant to pacify the restless spirits of those who died unnatural or violent deaths, and to ensure that the howling of dogs remained distant. During these nights, silence was demanded. No weddings, no sacrifices, no public business, because if a dog barked during Lemuria, it meant the rites had failed, and something had already crossed back over. Dogs were not feared themselves, they were respected. In Roman religion, dogs were linked to gods of the underworld, particularly Hecate, the goddess of magic, ghosts, and liminal spaces. Hecate was said to appear at crossroads, accompanied by black dogs whose howls announced her presence. Crossroads, too, were feared places. Executions often happened there. The unburied dead were said to linger at these intersections, waiting for travelers to whisper their names. A dog howling at a crossroads was an especially grim omen, seen as a confrontation between realms. To hear such a cry was to be caught between fate and free will. Would you change your path? Would you dare ignore the sound? In Roman tomb art, dogs appear often, sometimes resting at their master's feet, other times depicted alongside the journey into Hades. One famous example is the cave Canem mosaic, "Beware of the dog," found at the entrance of a house in Pompeii. Though often thought to mean guard dog, scholars believe it may also reflect deeper spiritual warnings, that the dog was watching the threshold between life and death. Because in Roman cosmology, thresholds mattered. The door between street and home, the line between dream and wake, the heartbeat between life and nothing. Dogs were said to guard these thresholds, and when they howled, it meant something was trying to cross. The fear of the howling dog was not limited to the elite. Among the plebeians and rural farmers, oral traditions passed down warnings. If the dog whines thrice at your door, make peace with your enemies. If the bitch howls with pup unborn, dig a grave before the morning. If the hound sings at the moon, someone will follow it there. These weren't metaphors. They were rules for survival. Because in an era before science, before medicine, before certainty, superstition was logic, and dogs were the messengers. Archaeological finds across Roman Britain and Gaul have unearthed canine burials beside human graves, sometimes carefully placed, sometimes ritualistically bound. In some cases, dogs were buried with infants, believed to protect the child's spirit in the afterlife. In others, dogs were sacrificed, throats cut, bodies posed as if in warning. One site in Roman Gaul revealed over 200 dog skeletons, many with no signs of injury. Scholars believe they were allowed to starve or die naturally, then buried during plague seasons as offerings to appease death. Even in decay, the dog remained a mediator. In time, Christianity spread across the empire, and dog symbolism shifted. The howling dog became associated less with divine warning and more with demonic forces, particularly in medieval interpretations of hellhounds and black dogs as spectral hunters, but echoes of the Roman belief persisted. In rural Italy, into the 19th century, farmers would change travel plans or cancel weddings if the local dogs barked too often without cause. In Sardinia, it was said that a dog scratching at the wall meant the soul of a lost ancestor was trapped nearby. The old beliefs never truly vanished. They simply changed their coat. Psychologically, the superstition touches something primal. A dog's howl is eerie, unlike any other sound, long, mournful, vibrating with a frequency that resonates in the chest. It mimics the human voice in grief. It awakens the same place that hears wailing, that feels dread before comprehension. Some scientists argue that dogs react to changes in scent, temperature, or electrical fields near death. They can smell chemical shifts in the human body hours before our senses register anything. Others dismiss it. But those who've watched a dog lie beside the dying know they see something. Whether spiritual or biological, they know. And when they howl, it is not without reason. So the next time your dog raises its head and cries to the dark, don't hush it too quickly. Don't curse it. Don't ask what's wrong, because it may not be looking at you. It may be looking through you. As the howl fades and the silence returns, we step now toward a deeper myth, one not whispered, but screamed through blood. A pact carved in flesh, a lesson sealed in iron, and a fear that buried its victims under stone. The Bell Witch of Tennessee, America's most documented haunting. It began with knocking, soft at first, barely noticed among the creaks of the wooden floorboards and the rustle of wind through the Tennessee trees. But soon the knocks grew louder, more insistent. They came at night, always after the lamps were dimmed and the children were tucked into their beds. Then came the whispers, indecipherable at first, just fragments of sound that drifted through the darkened halls. But they sharpened with time, formed into words, phrases, laughter, a woman's voice, and finally, the screams. The Bell family had come to the Red River settlement in 1804 to farm and raise their children in peace. By 1817, peace was the last thing they knew. They were being hunted by something they couldn't see, something that spoke, struck, and tormented without rest. And soon, all of Tennessee would come to fear the Bell Witch. The Bell Witch legend is unlike any other in American folklore. It is not just a ghost story, it is a case, documented, investigated, and witnessed by dozens of people over 4 harrowing years. Its roots lie in the deep soil of Adams, Tennessee, where John Bell, his wife Lucy, and their children settled on a modest farm. They were respected, members of the community, faithful, hard-working, close to their church. But one night in 1817, John began seeing strange animals on his property. A creature with a dog's body and a rabbit's head. A bird too large to be real. Then the sound started, chains dragging across the floor, knocking on doors, scratching from within the walls. And then the voice came. She called herself Kate. Kate wasn't just a whisper in the shadows. She spoke aloud, clear, mocking, intelligent. She sang hymns, quoted Bible verses, argued theology, and she focused her fury on 2 members of the household, John Bell, the patriarch, and his daughter Betsy. Betsy Bell, a teenager at the time, suffered the worst of it. She was slapped across the face, pinched, hair pulled, thrown from her bed, her sheets torn away by invisible hands. She would scream in the night, claiming to feel icy fingers on her neck. John Bell, meanwhile, became increasingly ill. He suffered from seizures, swelling of the tongue, violent convulsions. Doctors were baffled. The entity claimed it would kill him, and in 1820 he died. At his funeral, witnesses claimed to hear laughter from an unseen woman who shouted, "I fixed his medicine." What made the Bell Witch phenomenon extraordinary was not just the intensity, but the number of credible witnesses. Over 100 people reportedly heard or saw the entity, neighbors, ministers, doctors, even a future president of the United States. General Andrew Jackson, who would later become the 7th president, visited the Bell farm in 1819 after hearing of the haunting. He brought with him skeptics, horses, and equipment. But before they reached the property, their wagon stopped moving, frozen in place by some invisible force. The horses reared. The air grew cold. And then a disembodied voice told them they could proceed. Jackson reportedly said, "By the eternal boys, it is the witch." Later that night, his men were attacked. One was slapped so hard he flew across the room. They fled by morning. The Bell Witch became a national sensation. Newspapers printed stories. Word spread across the frontier. But no one could explain what or was happening. The witch's voice would answer questions before they were asked. She would reveal secrets from distant towns. When neighbors came to mock the Bells, she recited their sins aloud, humiliating them. When preachers visited, she debated scripture. She hated hypocrisy, but praised Lucy Bell, the family matriarch, for her virtue. She was not just a spirit, she was conscious, intelligent, selectively cruel, and terrifyingly present. In 1821, After the death of John Bell and Betsy's broken engagement to a local boy named Joshua Gardner, whom the witch insisted she must never marry, the spirit said goodbye. "I'll be gone for 7 years," she said. True to her word, the activity ceased. And 7 years later, in 1828, the spirit returned, for a time. This time she appeared to John Bell Jr., engaging him in long philosophical discussions about the meaning of life, war, and spirituality. She made predictions about the Civil War, disease, and industrialization, many of which eerily came true. Then she vanished again. The Bell Witch legend was recorded in an 1894 book by Martin Van Buren Ingram, a Tennessee journalist. His account, an authenticated history of the Bell Witch, gathered testimonies, letters, and oral traditions from descendants and community members. It solidified the legend and remains one of the most cited sources on the haunting. Skeptics argue that Ingram embellished or invented details, that the story was a mix of hysteria, fraud, and frontier imagination, that perhaps Betsy or another family member fabricated the events, but no one has ever fully debunked it. Too many witnesses, too many details, too many moments where the entity acted beyond the capacity of any human trickster. Modern investigators who visited the Bell Witch Cave, a limestone cavern near the Old Bell property, report unusual phenomena: electronics failing, sudden chills, disembodied voices. Some say the spirit still lingers, tied to the land. Others believe Kate was never just a ghost. Some theories propose a poltergeist born from teenage trauma, a tulpa, a spirit manifested by belief itself, a residual haunting looped through tragedy, a demonic entity, intelligent and mocking, pretending to be someone else entirely. And yet, through all the theories, Kate's identity remains unknown. She never revealed her origin, only her intent, and she kept her promise. The Bell Witch is terrifying not because she haunts, but because she chooses, she speaks, she thinks, she punishes, she judges. She is not a lost soul crying in the dark. She is a voice that knows you're listening. To this day, in Adams, Tennessee, locals still tell the story. The Bell family's descendants still refuse to speak of it aloud. And every so often, a visitor to the cave hears something they shouldn't. A laugh in the dark, a breath at their ear, a knock on the stone behind them, and then the silence returns. But something has already entered. From this voice in the American wilds, we now return to the silence of the mountains, where ancient spirits wear animal skins, where shape means nothing and trust is fatal, where the deer isn't a deer, and the man you follow isn't a man. Shapeshifters of the Arctic, Inuit legends of the Tunrit. The snowstorm had swallowed the horizon. White lashed against white as the wind howled over the tundra, so loud it masked the crunch of footsteps behind the hunter. He turned, expecting to see the boy he'd brought along, the quiet apprentice from the southern coast. But what stood there was not a boy. It wore his coat, his face, even the scar above his eyebrow. But the eyes were wrong, too wide, too hollow, and the footprints it left behind were round, hoofed, not human. The hunter didn't run. He knew it wouldn't help. You can't outrun something that doesn't walk the way you do. You can't reason with something that only pretends to be human. He whispered one word, Tunrit, and was never seen again. Far from the firelit folktales of Europe and the desert curses of the Middle East, there lives a cold, quiet terror in the Arctic North, a fear passed down among the Inuit, Yupik, and other indigenous peoples of this circumpolar world. These are not ghosts, not demons, not witches. They are shapeshifters, beings that mimic the human form, often poorly. Things that copy your friend's walk, your brother's laugh, your dog's bark, until the moment you get too close, and then you see the fingers are too long, the shadow moves wrong, the voice forgets a name, and by then it's too late. The Tunrit, sometimes spelled Tornat or Tunghat, are one of the most feared entities in Inuit oral tradition. While descriptions vary between regions, one theme persists. They are non-human, spirits that mimic humans to hunt them. They are said to wear animal skins or human garments, to creep close during blizzards or whiteouts, and to lure people away from the safety of the camp. Their feet often give them away. Some stories say they leave no footprints at all. Others say they leave animal prints, hooves, paws, even reversed footprints that trail toward the camp, not away. In all cases, the result is the same: disappearance, death, and no body to bury. In the old days, Inuit hunters would disappear into the snow without warning. No sign of struggle, no blood, just a trail that ended in nothing. Sometimes their sled dogs would return alone, fur matted, eyes wild. Sometimes not even that, and the elders would say it was not the cold that took him. The belief in shapeshifters is not unique to the Arctic. Cultures across the world hold tales of skinwalkers, were-beasts, and spirits that wear flesh like clothing. But the Arctic's shapeshifters are different. They are not cursed humans. They are spirits pretending to be human. They come from a realm beyond the ice, a space where names hold power and the dead speak in dreams. In some stories, they are the angry dead, those who were never properly buried, or who died with hate in their hearts. In others, they are primordial spirits born from the wilderness itself. Whatever their origin, their motive is hunger, not just for flesh, but for form, for the warmth of a human body, for the firelight, for the breath they can't create. And the only way to survive them is to recognize the lie before it's too late. The danger lies in how convincing they are. The Tunrit might mimic a cry for help in the voice of your wife, or call your name in the voice of your child. They wait at the edge of the storm, watching, listening, perfecting. Some say they can be detected by looking at the eyes. They don't blink, or they blink too often, or they can't quite match the human stare. Others say the mouth is always a little wrong, too many teeth, or none at all. A few tales mention a smell, a scent like rotting leather or burning fat. But most of the time, there is no warning, only the sudden, gut-deep feeling that something is pretending to be someone you love. The fear of shapeshifters is so deeply embedded in Arctic culture that it influences daily life. Houses were built in circles to keep eyes on all sides. People rarely traveled alone, especially in whiteout conditions. Names were sacred, passed carefully, used deliberately, because to know someone's name was to hold power over their spirit, and children were warned never to follow a voice no matter how familiar, if it came from the snow. One wrong step, and they'd be gone. In the 1940s, anthropologist Knud Rasmussen collected oral histories from Inuit elders who spoke openly of shapeshifters. One man described encountering a hunter who did not eat, did not blink, and did not sleep. When asked his name, the man gave no answer, just stared. He vanished into the night. That same week, 2 sled teams disappeared. No bodies, no gear, no trace, just a line of dog tracks running away. In modern times, some attribute the stories to polar hysteria, a psychological condition caused by isolation, extreme cold, and perpetual night. Others suggest the tales originated from warnings to avoid strangers during times of scarcity. But many Arctic dwellers, especially elders, insist the spirits are real. Even today, search and rescue teams in the north report strange findings. Abandoned camps with no signs of struggle, radios crackling with unknown voices, trails that stop in mid-snow, and sometimes a lone figure spotted on the horizon, waving, calling for help, who vanishes before they can be reached. These stories are not just about monsters, they are about identity, about the terror of losing yourself or watching someone you love become unrecognizable. In a land where survival depends on knowing your pack, your blood, your tribe, The idea of a perfect imitation is horrifying. And what is more terrifying than a face you trust wearing someone else underneath? In Inuit mythology, the only protection against the Tunrit is knowledge. To speak their name, to question what you see, to trust your instincts, even when your eyes betray you. Fire helps, prayer helps, but nothing protects like vigilance. Once a Tunrit is inside your circle, the chances of survival drop to nothing. So when you hear someone knock at your tent in a storm, don't answer right away. Don't call back. And if the voice outside sounds exactly like your brother, make sure your brother is still beside you. Because if he's not, it's already too late. As the wind howls through the snowfields, we now leave the Arctic behind. We return to fire, to ritual, to the pounding of drums and the flicker of torchlight, to a forest where hunger has teeth. And the only way to stay safe is to never step outside the circle. Aztec human sacrifice, when the sun required blood. The drums started before dawn, low, rhythmic, unrelenting. Their sound echoed across the Tenochtitlan causeways like thunder caught in stone. At the summit of the Great Pyramid, priests, in feathered cloaks and obsidian masks, raised their arms to the sky, toward the pale horizon where the sun had not yet risen. The people gathered below, silent, waiting. Then came the victim. His chest was bare, his eyes were wild. He had been fed, clothed, honored. He was not a prisoner now, he was a gift. And in Aztec belief, there was no greater offering than a heart still beating. As the priest pulled him onto the sacrificial stone, the sun crested, the mountain's edge. The crowd exhaled. Blood struck stone, and the sun rose. To the Aztecs, sacrifice was not murder, it was maintenance. Their world was one of constant, delicate balance. The earth had been created and destroyed multiple times before. Each age, each sun, had ended in catastrophe. And now they lived beneath the fifth sun, knowing that it too would one day die, unless they fed it, unless they offered it what it demanded, not gold, not grain, blood. Aztec cosmology taught that the gods themselves had once sacrificed their own blood to create the world. At Teotihuacan, in the time before time, the gods gathered to reignite the sun. One leapt into the fire to become the sun, another, in envy, followed and became the moon. But to make the sun move across the sky, they needed fuel. The gods slit their own throats. This origin myth set the precedent. Blood is the currency of creation, and humans, made from the ashes of old worlds and the bones of the gods, owed there, lives to that debt. Sacrifice in Aztec culture wasn't fringe, it was institutionalized, celebrated, and constant. The capital city of Tenochtitlan, home to hundreds of thousands, centered around the Templo Mayor, a great pyramid with twin temples at its peak, one for Huitzilopochtli, the god of sun and war, and one for Tlaloc, the god of rain and fertility. Each had their own rituals, each demanded offerings, and at the center of it all was the belief that without regular human sacrifice, the sun would stop, the rains would cease, and the world would end in darkness and chaos. The rituals were public. The victims, often prisoners, of war or slaves, were washed, fed, and sometimes venerated for weeks before the offering. They were seen not just as people, but as embodiments of the gods themselves. Some were paraded through the streets, adorned in costume, surrounded by music and dancing. But the end was always the same. At the top of the pyramid, the victim was laid on a sacrificial stone, a curved surface designed to arch the chest upward. A priest wielding an obsidian blade would then slice through the chest cavity and remove the still beating heart, lifting it toward the sun. The body was thrown down the pyramid's side. Sometimes the heart was burned. Sometimes it was buried. Sometimes it was fed to the fire. These sacrifices were not occasional events. They were embedded in the Aztec calendar, tied to gods, seasons, and celestial events. In the festival of Tlacaxipewalistli, victims were forced to fight warriors while armed with fake weapons before being sacrificed. During Toxcatl, a year-long impersonator of the god Tezcatlipoca was paraded through the city, worshipped, and then killed. For Tlaloc, child sacrifices were made. If the children cried, it was seen as a blessing, tears representing rain. Modern historians estimate that tens of thousands of people were sacrificed annually. Some records suggest 20,000 human hearts were offered during the consecration of the Templo Mayor in 1487, though numbers remain debated. Still, the scale is undeniable. To us, it is barbaric, unthinkable. But to the Aztecs, it was survival. It was a contract between humans and the divine. Every sunrise was proof that the gods had accepted yesterday's offering. Every drought, eclipse, or crop failure was a warning that the debt had not been paid. The sun was not a guarantee. It was a god with needs, and hunger was its only language. The Spaniards, led by Hernán Cortés, arrived in 1519 and were horrified by what they saw. The conquistadors described temples slick with blood, walls decorated with skulls, and rituals that chilled even their war-hardened bones. Bernal Díaz del Castillo, a soldier under Cortés, wrote, "The walls were so encrusted with blood that it was as if they had been painted red." To the Spaniards, this was proof of paganism, a demonic culture, a world that needed conquest. To the Aztecs, it was faith. And when the empire fell, so too did the rhythm of sacrifice. But the fear behind it, the idea that the sun could vanish if forgotten, did not. Even centuries later, echoes remain. In rural parts of Mexico, blood offerings are still made, to saints, to spirits, to nature. Chickens are slaughtered. Blood is spilled on altars, not as brutality, but as tradition, as exchange. Because the idea persists, life requires payment, and sometimes the only thing worthy of payment is life itself. Anthropologists have long debated the function of Aztec sacrifice. Was it political? A tool to instill fear in enemies and control allies? Was it ecological? A way to manage population during times of scarcity? Was it theological? A genuine belief in reciprocity with the divine? The answer may be all three. But at its core, the superstition that powered the entire civilization was this: if we do not feed the gods, we will die. It was terrifying, not just because it required death, but because it promised apocalypse if ignored. The Spanish eventually destroyed the temples, melted the gold, burned the codices. But they could not erase the fear. Even now, the ruins of Tenochtitlan lie beneath modern-day Mexico City. Beneath the subways and skyscrapers, the bones remain, and the sun still rises. But somewhere, buried in the cultural memory of a people, is a whisper. We must keep it moving. We must give it something, or it will go dark again. As the blood dries and the pyramid is emptied, we now turn toward a quieter death, a cursed island, 1,000 broken toys, and a man who lived alone with them, listening for whispers, where the dolls are not mute, and the eyes are never really closed. The island of the dolls, Mexico's haunted canals. The boat glided silently through the canals of Xochimilco, the water black beneath the stars. The oarsman didn't speak. He didn't need to. Every local knew the route. Every local knew the warnings. As the trees thickened, their twisted limbs arching over the channel like skeletal arms, something changed. The air grew cold. The wind carried a faint creaking sound, like wood rubbing against wood. And then they appeared. Dozens, hundreds, dolls, hanging from the trees, bound to trunks, impaled on branches, limbs missing, hair tangled, eyes blank, and all of them watching. Welcome to La Isla de las Muñecas, The Island of the Dolls. A place born not from a legend, but from a life. A superstition so powerful it drove one man to madness, or maybe to salvation. No one knows for sure. In the southern reaches of Mexico City, the canals of Xochimilco are the last remnants of the ancient Aztec lake system. Once vital arteries for trade and agriculture, they are now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, famous for colourful trajinera boats and floating gardens called chinampas. But one of these islands is different. It doesn't sell flowers, it sells fear. The story begins in the 1950s with a man named Don Julian Santana Barrera, a solitary caretaker who chose to live alone on a tiny island deep in the canals. A devout and quiet man, Julian's life changed when, according to his own account, he discovered the body of a young girl who had drowned in the canal near his island. He was too late to save her, but he claimed that her spirit never left. Shortly after her death, he began hearing whispers in the wind, footsteps where there should have been none, the crying of a girl at night echoing across the water. And then, one day, he found a doll floating in the canal. He pulled it from the water and hung it on a tree, as an offering, a gesture, a tribute. But the crying didn't stop, so he found another doll, and another. Soon he was collecting them, from trash heaps, from the water, from wherever he could find them. He hung them from every tree, nailed them to walls, strung them from vines. He never cleaned them, never dressed them. Some were broken, others were eyeless. It didn't matter. What mattered was quantity. What mattered was devotion. He believed that if he gave the girl enough companions, enough attention, she would be appeased, that she would protect the island, not haunt it. But over time, the dolls became something else, a warning, a shrine, a superstition that took on a life of its own. Locals began avoiding the island. Fishermen claimed they saw the dolls move, that their heads turned, that their eyes followed. Others said the girl's spirit had entered the dolls, and that some were more active than others. Tourists began arriving, curious and nervous. Julian didn't speak to them much, only muttered about the girl and how she wanted more dolls. By the 1990s, the entire island was covered. There were over 1,000 dolls, maybe more, hanging from trees, impaled on fence posts, tied to poles, their faces weathered by sun and rain, their mouths warped in permanent screams. It looked like a nightmare, and yet it was an act of love. In 2001, after nearly 50 years on the island, Don Julian Santana died. He was found face down in the very same canal where he claimed the girl had drowned. Some say he saw her again before he died, that he spoke to her, that he told her he was ready. Others believe his life ended the moment he stopped hanging dolls. Either way, the legend was complete. Today, La Isla de las Muñecas remains a popular yet unsettling tourist attraction. Visitors bring dolls to leave on the trees, not for fun, but out of fear. The belief persists. If you don't bring a doll, the girl might follow you home. Some say the island is now a portal, a nexus of trapped spirits, fueled by belief, ritual, and grief. Travelers report hearing whispers. Some claim their phones die upon arrival. Others see shadows move between trees. One girl fainted after a doll's head turned on its own. None of these stories are confirmed, and yet no one who visits leaves untouched. Why does this superstition hold such power? It lies in the intersection of innocence and decay. Dolls, by nature, are human mimics, objects made to resemble life. When broken, weathered, and neglected, they become grotesque reflections of what we fear most. Childhood corrupted, playthings, possessed, faces with no soul. Add to that the story of a lonely man, haunted by guilt or love or madness, and the superstition becomes unshakable. We don't fear the girl, we fear what we might owe her. Psychologists point to anthropomorphism, our tendency to assign life to human-shaped objects. The uncanny valley effect makes distorted dolls uniquely unsettling. We see something familiar, eyes, lips, hands, but twisted just enough to activate deep evolutionary alarm. Anthropologists, meanwhile, connect the island to broader patterns of votive offerings. From ancient Rome to rural Asia, people leave objects at sacred sites to appease spirits, bargain with fate, or confess unspoken fears. In that context, the dolls become more than toys. They are confessions. Locals say the island still isn't safe, that the spirit of the girl was never appeased, that now Don Julian walks with her, and that the dolls are no longer offerings, but warnings. And should you take one, should you mock them, you'll hear footsteps in the night. Water dripping on your floor, a soft creak behind you, and somewhere a tiny voice, giggling. As the dolls swing silently in the breeze, we leave this haunted shrine behind. We step now into darkness of another kind, where the monsters are not spirits, but ideas, where evil wears a smile and a number, and the cost of misfortune is simply being born on the wrong day. Cursed numbers and lottery deaths, when luck is a lie. He bought the ticket on a whim, a set of numbers he'd been seeing everywhere, on receipts, clocks, license plates, a pattern that whispered something to him, familiar, insistent. That night, when the numbers were drawn, he sat frozen in his kitchen chair, the television humming in the background. He had won. Millions. But by morning, he was dead. A car crash. Sudden. Clean. And the numbers, the same cursed sequence, appeared, again, in the wreckage, on the clock frozen at the moment of impact, on the license plate of the truck that hit him. The numbers had brought fortune, and then they'd collected their fee. Across cultures and centuries, humans have sought to define the divine chaos of chance. We throw dice, we flip coins, we draw lots. We number our days and our doors, searching for order and randomness. But behind the bright lights of lotteries and the seductive promise of lucky numbers lurks a darker truth. Sometimes numbers aren't lucky at all. Sometimes they're cursed. Let's begin with a number almost everyone fears. 13. In Western superstition, 13 has long been a symbol of bad luck, misfortune, even death. The fear has a name, triskaidekaphobia. Many buildings skip the 13th floor. Hotels often jump from room 12 to 14. Airplanes avoid row 13. And when the 13th day of the month lands on a Friday, some refuse to leave their homes. But why? Some link it to the Last Supper, where 13 people dined, Jesus and his 12 apostles, and one of them, Judas, would betray him. Others point to Norse mythology, where the trickster god Loki crashed a dinner of 12 gods, making 13, leading to the death of the beloved Balder. But the real terror isn't just in the number itself, it's in the pattern of punishment that follows those who ignore it. Take the case of Apollo 13, the ill-fated NASA mission launched at 1313 military time on April 11, 1970. 1 + 1 + 4 + 1 + 9 + 7 + 0 + 23, 2 + 3 + 5, then 1 + 3 + 4, then squared, and so on. The number theorists never stop. 56 hours into the flight, an oxygen tank exploded. The mission barely avoided disaster. The public blamed the number. NASA quietly avoided it afterward. But 13 is just the beginning. In Italy, it's not 13 but 17 that's feared. The Roman numeral 17 can be rearranged to spell vixi in Latin. I have lived, a euphemism for death. As a result, Italian hotels skip room 17, and aircraft omit row 17. In China, the number 4 is feared. It sounds like the word for death in Mandarin and Cantonese. Buildings omit it, phones avoid it, hospitals unreal, estate developers refuse to use it. This fear isn't arbitrary, it's powerful. In Hong Kong, property values drop significantly for apartments with the number 4. In Japan, the same is true for rooms in maternity wards. The superstition becomes self-fulfilling and sometimes lethal. Enter the world of cursed lottery numbers. In 2003, a small convenience store in Georgia, USA, sold 112 winning lottery tickets, each playing the same numbers: 22, 28, 32, 33, 39, and 40. Suspicious? Yes. But the real mystery is that only 5 winners claimed their prizes. The rest never showed up. Some said the numbers had come to them in dreams. Others were advised by strangers. But many vanished, moved away, or simply refused to collect the money. The state launched an investigation. Fraud? No. Just fear. Whispers of a devil's draw spread through the community, that anyone who won on those numbers would die within the year. Some mocked the superstition, until 2 of the original 5 winners died in unrelated freak accidents within 6 months. A third was reported missing. The remaining 2 refused interviews. To this day, no one in that town plays that sequence. In Thailand, lottery superstition runs deep. People flock to temples to divine lucky numbers from candle wax, snake dreams, or the shapes of tree bark. When someone dies, mourners check the license plate of the hearse, the number of flower petals, the order of the coffin, anything to extract numbers. But the reverse is also true. When a number is associated with bad luck, it is avoided at all. Costs. In 2010, a Bangkok vendor sold a series of lottery tickets based on a monk's final dream. Hundreds of people played. Only one won. He was struck by lightning a week later. The rest returned their tickets. In Russia, the number 666 carries weight, as it does in many Christian-majority countries. The number of the beast, drawn from the Book of Revelation, is believed to be a harbinger of the Antichrist. In 2004, a man in Yekaterinburg won a car with license plate A666TT. He crashed the vehicle the same day. Later, his house caught fire. No cause was ever determined. His wife claimed they had been marked. The car was never driven again. Why do we fear these numbers? Some psychologists point to apophenia, the human tendency to see patterns where none exist. We crave meaning. We fear chaos. Numbers offer structure. But when structure fails us, when luck turns dark, those same numbers become symbols of malevolence. Others argue that confirmation bias plays a role. We remember the unlucky 13, but not the safe 13. We hear about deaths connected to certain numbers, but not the countless lives untouched. And yet, superstition persists, because sometimes the coincidences are too sharp, too precise, too personal. Consider the case of lottery curse victims. Dozens of winners across the globe have died under bizarre, violent, or tragic circumstances. Abraham Shakespeare, who won $30 million in Florida, was murdered by a woman who claimed to manage his money. Uruj Khan, who won $1 million in Illinois, was poisoned by cyanide before he could cash the check. Jeffrey Dampier, a $20 million winner, was kidnapped and killed by his own sister-in-law. Their numbers changed everything, but not for the better. In numerology, every number holds meaning. Leadership, isolation, 2. Balance, duality. Mystery, spirituality. Power, but also karmic debt, and some combinations, particularly when repeated, are said to open doors. To what? No one agrees, but many are unwilling to find out. Some cultures counter the fear with rituals. In India, unlucky numbers are cleansed by sacred ash. In Greece, people burn incense and spit to ward off numeric curses. In Brazil, special bracelets are tied with a set number of knots, each one representing a wish to cancel misfortune. And in the United States, people wear lucky numbers as tattoos, amulets, and passwords, without realizing that to some, those same digits are a curse in waiting. The truth is, numbers are tools, but tools, in the wrong hands or the wrong hearts, can destroy. We invented them to track the stars, then used them to build bombs, to declare debts, to draw lots in war, to sentence prisoners, to select victims. In the bright light of logic, numbers are neutral. But in the shadows of superstition, they become signs, warnings, symbols of doom dressed in digits. So next time you buy a lottery ticket and feel a certain combination call to you, ask yourself, who else has heard it before, and what did it cost them? Now, from numbers whispered by fate, we enter a place where fate is no longer in question, where death wears a face, where the final breath is accompanied not by a number, but by a cry from beneath the floorboards, where the house itself remembers what we try to forget. The house that kills, Victorian superstitions of the sentient home. The new owners didn't notice it at first. The stairs creaked a little too often. The nursery door wouldn't stay shut. Their dog refused to enter the parlour, growling, at the fireplace. The clock in the main hallway stopped at exactly 3:33 every morning, despite 3 professional repairs. Then came the dreams. Their daughter, barely 5, began waking at night, saying the walls were whispering. "It wants me to play," she said. "It says it used to have a little girl too." The mother brushed it off, until she found her daughter's name etched into the back of a cupboard door, written in a style 2 centuries old. She had never told her daughter how to spell it. Long before haunted houses became a staple of horror films, the Victorian era was steeped in a darker, subtler fear. That the house itself could be alive, that it could remember, that it could punish, and most terrifying of all, that it could choose. The Victorian age, stretching from 1837 to 1901, was a time of paradox, rapid industrial progress paired with deep superstition, spiritual awakenings alongside scientific revolution. It was an age obsessed with death, mourning, and the afterlife, and nowhere was that obsession more deeply embedded than in the home. Houses were not just places to live. They were symbols of class, of memory, and of mortality. They were sanctuaries and prisons. During this period, the concept of the unquiet home emerged in English folklore and spiritualism, a belief that some houses were not merely haunted by ghosts, but were sentient, cursed by history, and capable of influencing the thoughts and fates of those within. Unlike ghost stories, these homes didn't simply contain spirits, they became the spirit. Consider Borley Rectory, often called the most haunted house in England. Built in 1862, it stood in Essex as the residence of several Anglican rectors. Almost immediately after construction, strange phenomena began. Footsteps in empty halls, disembodied voices, bells ringing by themselves, objects thrown by invisible hands. But it wasn't the occasional haunting that disturbed witnesses. It was the way the house seemed to react. New residents would report new types of hauntings, tailored to their fears. Investigators described the building as shifting moods, growing colder, more oppressive, as if it were aware of being watched. In 1939, the rectory burned down in mysterious circumstances. Witnesses claimed they saw a face in the flames. The ruin still stands. The legend has only grown. This belief that a house could be possessed, not just haunted, was rooted in several key Victorian superstitions: architectural memory, the idea that stone, wood, and walls could remember trauma, that buildings constructed over sites of pain, battlefields, executions, burials, would absorb and eventually express that pain. Residual energy. A popular theory in the spiritualist circles of the 1800s claimed that intense emotions, especially those around death, abuse, or madness, left psychic imprints in space. Certain rooms, especially attics, cellars, or nurseries, were believed to retain screams, fears, or final words. Symbolic layouts. Victorians believed that a poorly designed house could trap energy: staircases that doubled back, hallways with dead ends, rooms without windows. All were considered spiritually dangerous. Some manuals even advised against placing mirrors opposite doors or beds near chimneys, lest the soul be sucked out during sleep. Even prominent figures of the time supported these fears. Sir William Barrett, physicist and founder of the Society for Psychical Research, conducted extensive studies on haunted dwellings, concluding that some houses think with dark intentions. Authors like M.R. James, Charlotte Riddell, and Elizabeth Gaskell filled their stories with sentient homes that fed on sorrow, manipulated guests, and kept secrets in the walls. The Victorian house was built not just for living, but for dying. Rooms were named for their association with death: the death chamber, where bodies were laid out; the mourning room, where families received condolences; the front parlour, reserved for wakes and visitations. These spaces were not sanitized, they were saturated. The furniture absorbed sobs, the wallpaper heard prayers. The floors bore the weight of coffins. Is it any wonder Victorians believed their homes became more than structures? They were witnesses, and witnesses remember. One case often cited in Victorian journals was the tale of Crowhaven Lodge, a modest estate in Wiltshire. After a series of owners died under mysterious circumstances — falls, drownings, sudden madness — investigators concluded the house had been built using timber from the gallows wood of Tyburn. The trees used to hang criminals, it was believed, carried a stain, a moral infection. Once incorporated into the home's beams and frames, it spread, turning the house into an executioner of its own. The home was eventually demolished. Nothing was rebuilt on the land. In modern terms, we'd call this cursed real estate. But for Victorians, it was deeper than that. The house was not cursed by coincidence, it was cursed by design. Several homes of the era were constructed specifically to trap or confuse spirits. The most famous is the Winchester Mystery House, built by Sarah Winchester, heiress to the Winchester rifle fortune. Plagued by grief and guilt over the deaths caused by her family's weapons, she was advised by a medium to never stop building, or the spirits would take her. She obeyed. For 38 years, the house was under continuous construction. It now contains staircases that lead to ceilings, doors that open to walls, windows on interior rooms, hallways that double back, and a layout so maze-like it disorients even trained architects. Sarah believed that only by confusing the spirits could she survive. Whether she did is still debated. Today, the idea of a sentient home persists in popular culture, from the haunting of Hill House to 1408 to The Shining. But the root of these tales lies in that long-ago Victorian fear that the house doesn't need a ghost, that the house is the ghost. Psychologists explain this fear as environmental influence. Strange architecture, poor lighting, low frequency, vibrations, all contribute to unease. We project emotion onto spaces. We anthropomorphize shadows. But what if it's not projection? What if it's recognition? Some researchers suggest infrasound, low frequencies generated by wind or machinery, can cause anxiety, nausea, or a sense of presence. But science only explains the symptoms, not the stories, not the rooms where paintings fall at 3:12 a.m., not the crawl space where the wood smells like sulfur, not the name whispered down the hallway you never gave anyone. So when you move into a new home, watch the walls, listen to the stairs, and if your child starts talking to someone in the attic, check for footprints, because some houses don't need doors to let things in. They were born with them already open, and now we leave behind the walls. And step into the open, to the field where the dead still rise, to the ritual that lives on, and to the flame that must never go out, because if it does, the ancestors will not be pleased. Funeral fire, the eternal flame, superstition of the Balkans. The villagers gathered in silence. The coffin rested in the center of the yard, its wooden frame wrapped in white cloth and wild flowers. But the focus wasn't on the body, was on the fire. A small clay lantern set just beside the head of the deceased flickered gently in the wind. It had been burning for hours. It would burn through the night. It had to. Because if the flame died before the burial, the soul would be lost, or worse, it would return. In the mountains of the Balkans, where Christian rites blur with pagan customs and oral tradition clings to the folds of stone villages, death is not merely an end. It is a transition. And like all thresholds in ancient belief systems, it must be guarded. For centuries, communities in Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia, Albania, and parts of Bulgaria held to a chilling superstition that the soul of the dead required a guiding fire, a flame that must remain lit from the moment of death until burial. If the fire faltered, the soul would become restless and it would try to find its way home. This flame was more than ritual, it was a contract. The living agreed to keep watch through storm, night, and snowfall, to tend the flame, feed it with cedar, olive oil, or lamb fat, protect it from wind and mischief. In return, the dead agreed to move on. If the flame burned true, the path to the next world remained open. The ancestors received the soul. Peace descended. But if the fire died, that path closed, and the spirit was left wandering, cold and furious. Some families used lanterns, others open braziers. In wealthier households, a second flame might be kept, in the hearth, just in case. Children were warned not to play near it. Women took turns keeping vigil. Old men sat cross-legged beside the fire, reciting prayers and folk songs deep into the night. In villages where Christian orthodoxy mixed with pre-Christian beliefs, priests would sometimes turn a blind eye to these customs, acknowledging their cultural weight, because they knew, in the Balkans, superstition and spirituality are threads of the same cloth. The origins of the funeral flame superstition are older than Christianity, possibly pre-Slavic, tied to Illyrian and Thracian burial rites. Archaeological sites in southern Serbia and northern Macedonia reveal urn burials surrounded by fire pits, ash circles, and charred animal bones. These were not cremations. They were offerings, fires, meant to carry prayers or light the way for the dead. Some anthropologists suggest the flame represents continuity, the idea that the dead are never fully gone. Their warmth lingers, their memory flickers, and like all fires, they require tending. But others believe something darker, that the flame is not symbolic. It is a seal, a fragile, flickering wall between this world and the next. Stories abound of what happens when the fire goes out. In a remote Montenegrin village in 1891, a family's funeral flame was snuffed out by wind while the men were away digging the grave. That night, the household claimed to hear knocking on the door, despite no one being outside. Then the animals began to panic. Then came the dreams. The mother saw her dead brother standing by the fireplace, silent, wet from head to toe. The daughter woke screaming, convinced he had tried to pull her into the mirror. By dawn, the fire was relit. But for weeks, the family refused to sleep alone. In parts of rural Albania, the flame is accompanied by salt, iron nails, or animal teeth placed around the lantern to ward off evil. The flame is often anointed with blessed oil or lit using coals from the family hearth. Never a match, never a stranger's fire. And once the burial is complete, the flame is not simply extinguished. It must be allowed to die slowly. To blow it out is to invite misfortune. To snuff it violently is to summon revenants, restless spirits caught between worlds. These beliefs may seem folkloric, but even into the 20th century, Balkan families refused to bury their dead without a flame. War, migration, and communism challenged the practice, but never fully erased it. Even now, in mountain villages, some still place candles in windows during a funeral. Some still sleep beside the fire until the burial is done. Some still whisper old phrases, may his flame never fade, keep the fire, keep the peace, no light, no rest. Modern science offers little to say on the subject. Psychologists argue that the flame ritual provides a sense of agency in grief, a task to perform, a symbol to hold on to, that the superstition evolved to prevent premature burial or to ward off animals. Others connect it to ancient Zoroastrian fire rites or shared Indo-European funerary customs. But no explanation accounts for the fear, the real, inherited fear of what happens when the light goes out. The symbolism of the eternal flame has spread far beyond the Balkans. In Jewish tradition, the Ner Tamid, eternal light, burns in every synagogue, symbolizing God's constant presence. In military memorials, eternal flames burn to honor the dead. In Hinduism, cremation requires the sacred fire to burn continuously until the body is fully consumed. But in the Balkans, it is personal. It is not a general tribute. It is a negotiation with the dead, and if you break that trust, they will let you know. In 1995, a Serbian family reported a chilling experience during the Yugoslav wars. With no power and limited supplies, they were unable to maintain their traditional funeral fire after the sudden death of the grandfather. That night, in a house already shaken by conflict, they heard footsteps upstairs. No one was there. Objects moved. One of the grandchildren claimed to see the old man sitting at the kitchen table, weeping into his hands. After they finally buried him and lit a lantern by his grave, the disturbances stopped. But they never forgot the message. The flame is not a symbol, it's a doorway. Now, as the smoke rises and the ashes settle, we leave behind the flickering edge of mortality. We descend into a new terror, one that flies by night, that drinks not blood, but dreams, and that can only be stopped by one strange symbol. Drawn in salt, whispered in fear, passed down in secret. Night flyers, the owl superstition across civilizations. It perched on the roof beam, silent. The villagers found it at dawn, large, white-eyed, unmoving. An owl, watching the courtyard below, where the eldest member of the family had fallen, ill just days before. The bird did not flinch when they threw stones. It did not fly away when they shouted. It only stared. And later that night, as the man's final breath left his body, the owl let out a long, warbling cry. By morning, it was gone, and everyone knew it had come to collect. Of all the birds to grace myth and folklore, none inspire more contradictory fear and fascination than the owl. Revered in some cultures, feared in others, herald of wisdom, harbinger of death, a creature of twilight, perched between worlds. And in the superstitions of dozens of civilizations across Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Americas, the owl is not just a bird, it is a messenger, watcher, a curse on wings. The ancient Romans believed that an owl's cry foretold imminent death. According to the historian Pliny the Elder, an owl flew into the Capitoline Hill Temple just before the death of Julius Caesar. Afterward, Romans associated the bird with misfortune and ritual purification. If one appeared, it had to be captured and burned, its ashes scattered into the Tiber. The Greeks, in contrast, saw the owl in a different light, specifically the Athene Noctua, or little owl, which was the sacred animal of the goddess Athena. For them, the owl symbolized wisdom, military strategy, and protection. But even then, the distinction was fine. Not all owls were welcome, because when an owl turned its gaze upon you, it wasn't always a blessing. In the Highlands of Scotland, the barn owl was known as the ghost bird. Its white feathers, silent flight, and sudden shriek made it a symbol of the Cailleach, the old hag of winter and death. To hear one cry 3 times near your house was to be marked for death. In Ireland, it was said that owls held the souls of the dead, watching to see if mourners kept to proper funeral rites. If the rites were not followed, the owl would return to punish. In Welsh legend, the owl was connected to Blodeuwedd, a woman transformed into an owl as punishment for betrayal, a fate that left her cursed to fly in darkness and sorrow. A cross, Sub-Saharan Africa, owls are almost universally feared. In Nigeria, the Igbo people believe owls are spiritual spies, eyes of the dead sent to observe and report misdeeds. In Ghana, they are said to be witches in disguise, transforming to carry out their nocturnal curses. To hear an owl cry near your home is considered a death sentence. Children are taught from an early age to never mimic the call. Doing so invites the bird to answer, and when it answers, it does not leave alone. In the deserts of Arabia, the laylat, a shrieking nocturnal bird resembling an owl, is believed to be a vengeful spirit. In Bedouin lore, when a man is murdered unjustly, his soul becomes a night owl, doomed to roam until justice is done. It perches on rooftops, cries by the graveside, flutters past windows with a cold wind. In Egypt, the hieroglyph for M, an owl, is often softened or omitted in sacred texts. Some historians argue this is due to the owl's association with mummification and watching the dead. Among Native American tribes, the owl takes many forms and many warnings. For the Apache, the owl is a messenger of death. The Cherokee link it to witches. The Hopi believe it brings punishment to those who violate tribal laws. In Lakota tradition, the owl's cry is said to be the sound of the spirit world calling, especially when heard in winter. Yet, not all is fear. To some tribes, like the Ojibwe, the owl symbolizes protection for warriors. In war, it can guide arrows. In dreams, it warns of ambush. Even so, when one calls in the night near the home of a sick person, everyone holds their breath. One of the most chilling superstitions comes from India, where the owl is both revered and reviled. In Hindu mythology, the goddess Lakshmi, bringer of wealth, rides an owl. Her presence is auspicious. But in rural beliefs, especially in Bihar and Odisha, owls are associated with tantric rituals, especially during Diwali. Some believe sacrificing an owl and keeping its bones grants dark power, the ability to steal, luck, curse rivals, or draw wealth unnaturally. Indian authorities have reported the illegal capture of owls for black magic, particularly during eclipses or lunar feasts. Because to those who believe, an owl's eyes can see into other worlds, and its feathers, tools of power. But what links all these beliefs? It is not just the owl's appearance, it is its silence. Owls fly without sound, due to specialized feathers that mute airflow. They appear suddenly. They vanish without trace. They live in old barns, graveyards, and woods, places humans fear and, most unnerving of all, they watch. Their forward-facing eyes, so rare in birds, resemble human gaze. Their heads rotate unnaturally far. They see what we cannot. They hunt at night. As death does, they call to each other, in tones that resemble crying, laughing, or screaming. No wonder ancient peoples assumed they were more than birds. They were witnesses or predators. In modern urban areas, owls are sometimes welcomed, symbols of knowledge, mascots of schools, even tattooed onto bodies as guardians. But the old fears linger. In Hungary, an owl's cry is still feared during pregnancy. In, say, Mexico, the saying goes, "Cuando el tecolote canta, el indio muere." When the owl sings, the Indian dies. In the Philippines, the call of the cuckoo owl is believed to signal impending death in the household. Even in Europe, modern homeowners in rural areas report that they bless the windows or hang reflective charms if an owl perches too long nearby. 3. Superstition may be softened, but it has not died. Psychologists might explain owl superstition as a result of evolutionary instinct. Nocturnal animals with large eyes trigger alertness, fear, or awe. Owls' sounds, high-pitched, sudden, trigger, startle reflexes. But cultural anthropology offers another lens. The owl is a threshold creature, living by night, flying silently, observing from above. It is neither here nor there. It is a symbol of in-between, and in every society, the in-between is dangerous. So if you hear an owl outside your window tonight, don't rush to the door. Don't whistle back. Don't. Look it in the eyes, because maybe it's not calling to you. Maybe it's waiting. And now we leave the skies behind and return once more to stone and flame, to a superstition not whispered in dreams, but etched in laws, where an entire town, overnight, forgot how to bury its dead, because to speak a name was to curse your bloodline. The name you cannot say plague superstitions of the Black Death. They didn't call it the plague, not allowed, in the narrow streets of 14th century Europe, when rats vanished and birds fell silent, when the bells tolled too often and the air smelled of vinegar and rot. No one dared to speak the true name. They called it the Great Death, the Pestilence, the Shadow, but never the real word, because to say it was to summon it, and if the plague heard its name, it would find your door. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death swept across Europe with unimaginable fury. It arrived by ship, in the bellies of fleas and the blood of rats. In its wake, it left over 25 million dead, nearly 1/3 of the continent's population. Whole villages were erased, fields went untilled, churches overflowed with corpses. But as terrifying as the disease was, even more chilling was how people responded to it, not only with fear, but with superstitions so potent that language itself became dangerous. The belief that to name a thing was to give it power was not new. In ancient traditions, Babylonian, Egyptian, Celtic, the spoken word held sacred weight. To speak the name of a god, or a demon, or a disease was to acknowledge it, and thus invite its attention. By the Middle Ages, this belief had taken on viral potency. With the Black Death, people didn't just fear contagion through air or touch. They feared it through speech. A word could be as lethal as a wound. Priests advised their flocks to never say plague aloud. Town criers used euphemisms, the illness, the black wind, the morning breath. In some places, laws were passed against speaking the word in markets or churches. Why? Because people believed the plague was sentient, not just a punishment, but a hunter, a force that drifted through cities like smoke, listening, and if it heard its name, it would know where to strike next. This fear reshaped behavior. People wore charms sewn with misspelled versions of the word, hoping the disease wouldn't recognize its own name. Some towns banned writing the word on public notices, replacing it with symbols, an X, a skull, or an open hand. Others believed the word should be spoken only backward, and even then only during prayer, to confuse the spirit of the disease. In Florence, one chronicler reported, a man spoke of it at dinner, and the very next morning his daughter's breath had stopped. The table was not used again, the house was closed. The word had opened a door. The idea of verbal contagion, that sound spreads sickness, may seem irrational, but it gave structure to chaos. In a world where no one understood germs or immunity, the plague seemed to choose its victims with eerie precision. A healthy child, one day. A whole household the next. So people turned to superstition to regain control. If they could not cure the disease, they could at least avoid attracting it. And silence became survival. This fear of naming extended to objects and gestures. People carried posies of herbs, not just to block the stench, but to muffle words. It was believed that rose water on the tongue could sweeten any accidental mention of the pestilence. Rings were inscribed with nonsense syllables like sator arepo tenit opera rotas, a palindrome believed to confuse spirits. In some areas, children were forbidden to speak at all after sundown, lest their innocent words draw attention. Entire rituals of silence developed. In Bruges, if a household suspected infection, the family was ordered to stop speaking entirely for 3 days, during which a candle burned in the window and a priest passed by once each dawn, whispering blessings. The psychological toll was immense. To fear your own voice, to dread your child's laugh, to worry that a song hummed aloud might end in fever. It broke something in the collective mind, and this terror did not vanish with the plague. It echoed forward. Even in later pandemics, cholera, typhus, influenza, similar taboos re-emerged. Certain words were whispered, others were banned. And across Europe, generations passed down the lesson: speak not of death, or death will speak to you. The Black Death also fueled superstitions of scapegoats, those believed to carry the name of the disease. Jews were accused of poisoning wells and were massacred. Women accused of witchcraft were burned for calling the pestilence with incantations. Foreigners were exiled. Mute beggars were considered blessed. Unable to speak the cursed words, they were thought immune. A silent man was a safe man. Talker was a liability. In parts of rural Germany, a chilling rite emerged. When a plague wave approached a town, villagers would choose one person to take on the name, the plague namer. This person, always a volunteer or a criminal, was sent alone to the crossroads to speak the word aloud 7 times, then disappear into the forest, never to return. If the town survived, they were said to be redeemed. If not, the name had already done its work. Even today, echoes of this superstition linger. During outbreaks of modern diseases, we still see the power of euphemism, the big C for cancer, the thing for COVID in rural circles. He passed instead of he died. We soften language instinctively. We fear that saying it aloud might make it more real, or might bring it closer. And in literature, the trope of the unspeakable name endures. Voldemort in Harry Potter, he who must not be named. Lovecraftian. Horrors so alien they shatter sanity when spoken. Urban legends like Bloody Mary, a spirit summoned not by ritual, but by the repetition of a name. All of them draw from the same well. The medieval fear that a name is a key, and that once it is turned, something comes through. Modern medicine explains the plague in terms of Yersinia pestis, fleas, rats, and public hygiene. But no amount of rationality can fully erase the inherited dread. The fear that lingers not in our lungs, but on our tongues. That some names should not be said. That some doors should stay closed. And that some shadows still listen. Now, as the bell tolls and silence returns, we descend into the oldest fear of all, not of plague, not of spirits, but of ourselves, of the curse that lives in our blood, of the mark that cannot be washed away, of the superstition that says, if you betray your blood will betray you. The sin-eater, when one man carried the curse of a village. He arrived at dusk, as he always did, wearing a threadbare cloak, face hidden beneath a brimmed hat, hands stained with the dust of the dead. No one greeted him, no one dared. The family had already placed the loaf of bread and mug of ale atop the corpse's chest. Without a word, the man sat beside the body. He broke the bread, he drank the ale, and then he whispered a prayer no one could hear. The family looked away. They believed in what he was doing, but they couldn't bear to watch. He was the sin-eater, and he had come to consume the dead man's sins. Of all the superstitions surrounding death, few are as eerie, mysterious, and deeply symbolic as the practice of sin-eating, an ancient ritual in which a person, often a social outcast, symbolically absorbs the sins of the deceased by consuming food placed on or near the corpse. The belief that without this ritual, the soul of the dead would wander in unrest, burdened by the weight of unconfessed wrongdoing. But with a sin-eater present, the spiritual debt could be transferred. Not forgiven, not erased, transferred from the dead to the living. The ritual was most prevalent in Wales, the Welsh borderlands, and the English countryside, though echoes of it exist in Scotland, Ireland, and even parts of rural Appalachia in early American history. The sin-eater was not a priest. He was not sanctified. He was not welcome. He was, instead, feared, a necessary evil, a spiritual sponge who absorbed the darkness others refused to carry. The practice typically went like this. After death, a piece of bread, a mug of ale, or occasionally salt was placed on the chest or near the mouth of the deceased. The sin-eater would arrive, usually at twilight. In silence, or while murmuring a chant, he would consume the food, thereby taking upon himself the soul's remaining sins. A few coins were often paid. Then he would leave, without eye contact, without gratitude, and never, by the front door. He was considered unclean, spiritually dangerous. He had eaten death, and death left its mark. Where did this superstition originate? Some scholars trace it back to pre-Christian Celtic rituals, possibly connected to pagan notions of spiritual balance. Others see influence from Levitical scapegoat rites, in which the sins of a community were symbolically placed upon a goat and driven into the wilderness. But sin-eating, in its most visceral form, appears during the late medieval period, when rural communities lacked access to clergy. In these cases, people improvised. They could not afford a funeral mass. So they hired a sin-eater, a man to take the burden they could not lift, man to protect the dead from the afterlife, and the living from the dead. Accounts of sin-eating are rare, partly because the church condemned the practice. It was seen as blasphemous, a corruption of penance and salvation. No man, the church, argued, could absolve sins except through Christ. But villagers, especially in remote areas, clung to the rite because they saw it work. After a sin-eater's visit, strange noises ceased, dreams quieted, animals stopped pacing, children slept peacefully. The body, they said, settled. Yet the cost was great for the sin-eater. He became a pariah, feared, pitied, respected only in whispers. He carried a spiritual weight that grew heavier with each meal. It was believed that over time he would become haunted, physically marked, even possessed by the accumulation of sins he consumed. Some were said to age rapidly, others were driven mad. A few vanished into the forests, never to be seen again, because who can carry the grief of a village? Who can eat sin and not be consumed? One 17th century Welsh tale tells of a sin-eater who refused to perform the rite for a known murderer. He claimed the man's sins would poison him, that they were too thick to swallow. The family, desperate for peace, forced the ritual, binding the man, placing the bread in his mouth. He choked, he died, and so did the crops for 3 seasons afterward. Another account, from Herefordshire in the early 1800s, describes a woman who tried to become a sin-eater, a rare anomaly. She completed 3 rituals before, according to village rumour, she began to speak in voices not her own. She would wake screaming, speaking names of the dead no one had mentioned. One day, she wandered into the woods during a storm. They found her weeks later, blind and silent. In her lap, a loaf of blackened bread. Sin-eaters were never named in obituaries. They were not buried in consecrated ground. They left no written records, but they lived, and they died, alone. Because to carry the sins of the dead was to be exiled from the living. In Appalachia, the practice took root in the 18th and 19th centuries, brought by Welsh and Scots-Irish immigrants. Isolated mountain communities, with no formal churches, clung to the old rites. Even today, some families speak of grief takers, old men who would sit by a body for the final night, eating from the corpse's plate. Sometimes they were relatives. Sometimes they were strangers. Always they left before dawn. Why did this superstition persist? Because it offered a tangible way to resolve spiritual fear. In an age without understanding of disease, trauma, or psychology, the idea that a person's guilt could physically linger made sense, and the sin-eater became both sacrifice and savior. He was the scapegoat with a fork. A man who touched death so you didn't have to. Modern theologians and psychologists view the sin-eater as a symbol of emotional transference. a ritualized way to unburden grief and guilt at the time of death. But, to those who witnessed it, it was not metaphor, it was necessary. Because if the sins weren't eaten, they would rise. Today, the practice is officially gone. But the idea remains, in our stories, in our fears, and in our superstitions. We still look for someone to carry our guilt. We still fear what lingers after we're gone, and we still believe that not all burdens can be buried. Now, as we leave the table where sins were devoured, we follow the road out of the village, to a place no traveller returns from, where a single curse lies in the soil, and a wrong word can bind you to a death that was never yours. The curse of the traveller's grave, the death oaths of the desert. The grave was shallow, just a mound of dry earth beneath a crumbling stone marked with no name, only a symbol, scorched into the surface, an open palm, fingers curled. In warning, locals refused to approach it. Children were taught not to point. Tourists who wandered too close were quickly pulled away by guides. She died alone, they said, but she died swearing vengeance. And those who disturb her now, they do not dream peacefully. In the arid stretches of North Africa, the Levant, and deep into the Middle East, a rare but chilling superstition persists. Passed in whispers through nomadic tribes, old caravan routes, and ruined border towns, the fear of the traveller's grave, a grave not made by community, not dug by family, but carved in desperation, marked by curse, and sealed by a dying vow, what some call the death oath. The superstition is older than Islam, older than Rome. In ancient Bedouin tradition, a person who died alone and unavenged, especially in a place of isolation or exile, could swear a final oath at the moment of death. This vow, spoken with one's final breath, was believed to bind the soul to the place of death until the injustice was corrected. The soul would not rise, would not move on. It would wait. These graves, usually unmarked or marked only with cryptic symbols, are considered spiritually dangerous, not because they house spirits, but because they house rage. A trapped soul with unfinished business is not a ghost. It's a curse sealed in earth. And to disturb that earth is to inherit the vow. Accounts of these graves appear in the writings of Islamic jurists, Byzantine chroniclers, and even Crusader records, though none agree on what to do when one is found. Some say it must be circled 3 times in silence. Others insist you must leave a stone, a symbol of respect. A few warn that even looking too long is an invitation, but all agree you must never speak the name of the person buried there, if known, because to speak it aloud is to accept their oath, to pick up the blade they dropped, to carry the curse until it's resolved. One Bedouin tale, collected in the late 1800s, tells of a woman named Zina, betrayed by her tribe and left to die in the Negev desert. Before she succumbed to heat and thirst, she swore aloud, "No rain shall fall, no child shall thrive, until my blood is answered." Her body was found days later, surrounded by scorched earth. Nothing grew there for a generation. When her descendants finally returned and held a ceremony, burning salt, spilling milk, and reciting forgiveness, the drought lifted within weeks. Coincidence? Perhaps. But the region still calls that patch of desert Makad al-Lana, the place of the curse. Similar traditions exist in Morocco, where certain graves are called kubas, shrines to saints or travelers believed to have died, with powerful last words. These sites are revered, feared, and sometimes visited by the desperate, hoping the spirit will intercede, or at least not interfere. To approach one improperly, without a gift, without a prayer, is said to invite illness, nightmares, or drought of the soul. In some regions, salt is poured in circles around these graves to trap the energy. Others use iron nails, black thread, or goat bones, because once disturbed, the curse is restless, and it will find a new host. In modern times, The idea of the cursed grave surfaces in war zones, construction projects, and border disputes. A dam, built in southern Jordan, was halted when laborers refused to continue, believing they had uncovered a traveler's grave. Equipment failed. Workers fell ill. The site was quietly rerouted. In eastern Syria, a field of bones uncovered by archaeologists was reburied and blessed under tribal pressure. No museum would take the remains. The curse, they said, had not been lifted. Western scientists scoff, but the locals never returned. Why does this superstition persist? Because the desert holds memory differently. There are no stone cathedrals, no long family plots. There is sand, and sand remembers who bled upon it. It holds the heat of injustice, the silence of broken oaths, and when someone dies wrongfully, especially alone, it is believed their final words sink into the soil, waiting for someone to open their mouth. There are rules for survival. Do not camp near an unmarked grave. Do not dig in dry riverbeds without asking the land. Do not take from the dead without giving something back. And above all, do not take the name into your mouth. Because names, as we've learned, are not just identifiers. They are invocations. One story, recorded in 1934 by a British officer stationed in Palestine, tells of a patrol who uncovered a tomb while surveying near Wadi Rum. They removed a carved stone bearing a palm symbol. That night, their guide vanished. The next morning, the unit's camels refused to walk. 2 soldiers fell sick. The officer himself suffered hallucinations for days, visions of a woman in red standing beside his cot. When the stone was returned and a bloodless offering made, olive oil, frankincense, and water, the disturbances ceased. He never wrote the name again, only the warning. Mark the palm. Leave it be. The superstition is not about revenge. It's about unfinished cycles. In desert cosmology, the dead have a role to play. They must return. They must guide. They must rest. But a traveler, a soul without tribe, without justice, without closure, doesn't follow the rules. They cling. They hunger. They bind themselves to the earth through words. And until those words are fulfilled, they will not sleep. To this day, Bedouins leave small cairns beside certain graves. They burn herbs. They never look back after passing one. Tour guides speak in metaphor, never specifics. Locals tell tourists to smile politely and walk faster. And children are taught early. If you pass a grave and feel cold in your chest, say nothing. Say nothing. Now, as the sun sets over the final mound of sand and the last curse sleeps beneath salt and silence, we draw this journey to a close. We have traveled through fear and faith, superstition and survival, ritual and warning. We have seen how humanity, across centuries and continents, tries to explain the unexplainable. And in doing so, reveals the one truth that links every legend, every omen, every curse. We are terrified not of death itself, but of what refuses to die.